everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
And I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
Jason, what game are we talking about today?
We are talking about Final Fantasy X. I was about to say IV. XVI. Yes.
Well, you know, we probably are going to talk about XIV quite a bit too. You know, just by association. Apologies in advance to Delilah. She has to read and listen to this crap in our Slack channel all the time. And you know, there's a whole bunch of people that don't play 14, the MMO, the second MMO Final Fantasy game. For whatever reason. It's amazing. Go play it. But anyway, Reap the Spoils is a monthly spoiler cast where we pick a game, we play it, and then we come here and we spoil it and talk about it for, you know, a long time. Most of our episodes, they average at least 2 hours or longer. So, you know, hopefully you're strapped in and you're ready to listen to us talk about that for a long time. Today we're talking about Final Fantasy 16, the latest and, well, maybe not greatest, but we'll get into that, of the historical and storied Final Fantasy franchise, one that Jason and I are massive fans of.
Yes, they are. Isn't this your guys' most anticipated game this year?
Oh yeah.
Yes. This is my most anticipated game for years.
Yeah,
Wow.
same. This since its announcement, Jason and I have been all on board and waiting for this guy to come out. And did it deliver? You'll just have to keep listening to find out. Hey, by the way, guess what, guys? This is like for you guys and for all the listeners, new and old. This is the 50th core episode of Reap the Spoils.
Jeez.
We have covered 50 different things, and that's not counting the bonus episodes and the DLC only episodes. We've done a couple, like, you know, we did one on Resident Evil Village as DLC. We did one on the BioShock Infinite DLC. I'm not even counting those, which means we've done over 50 episodes of something. But this is the 50th like thing that we're covering. I can't even say game anymore because of our last episode. It makes it a little challenging to just say game now.
Yes.
But yeah, we've got a huge back catalog, so if you're new, go back and listen to that stuff. All right, sorry to keep everyone waiting. History lesson time. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Cool. Okay, Final Fantasy 16. That was developed by Creative Business Unit 3, which is, you know, an internal business or an internal developer team within Square Enix. There's Creative Business Unit 1, 2, 3. I think it stops at 3. I don't think it goes past 3. But this was developed
for reference for people who don't know. CB1 is they did like FF7 remake. They've been doing the main lines for, or if you consider that mainline, but you get what I'm saying.
I mean, there's, well, yeah, I would consider that mainline, but they'll also like see and Creative Business Unit 2 has kind of absorbed all of the Luminous Productions folks after like the absorption of that studio. It's kind of been like a gray area as to what CBU2 is, I think. But last I know about CBU2, they absorbed Luminous Productions developed Final Fantasy 15 and more recently Forspoken. So that's all absorbed into CBU2. But CBU3, developers of Final Fantasy 14, an MMORPG that Jason and I have put in just way too much time on, and will continue to do so.
Yo, Power Ranger costume coming out. Moonfair Festival, let's go.
True. We are getting some Power Rangers costumes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Delilah, you gotta start playing.
Oh my god, if we could get Delilah to do 14 and then do each expansion in an episode, oh my god.
We would be unstoppable.
I would need to quit my job.
So full production on Final Fantasy 16 actually began in 2016. Some planning began in 2015, but it really kicked off during the patch cycle for the first 14 expansion, Heavensward. I think around patch 3.4 was when production on 16 began, and had a lot of Final Fantasy 14 staff involved. Obviously, we have Naoki Yoshida as the producer, Masayoshi Soken as the composer, longtime 14 composer, amazing composer, does amazing work on that game and did amazing work on this game, if you ask me.
Oh yeah.
But there was also a lot of Ivalice Alliance staff that worked on this game. I don't have the names off the top of my head, but uh, a lot of people that worked on Final Fantasy 12, Final Fantasy Tactics. I think the Tactics spinoffs, Vagrant Story. Hiroshi Takai is the director of this title. He worked on Vagrant Story and actually traces his roots back to the Quest days, working on Tactics Ogre. So that really informs a lot of the aesthetics and setting of 16. We're going with lots of like more medieval like knights and kingdoms and whatnot for a setting. It really came through from the staff, the things that the staff that worked on this game worked on in the past. Very reminiscent of things like Ivalice, Final Fantasy Tactics, Final Fantasy 12, etc. Anyway, the game was revealed September 2020 in the big PS5 showcase that was shown before the PlayStation 5 came out. It was a really cool reveal. Jason and I peed our pants. We were so excited about it. Found out, I think in an interview years later, kind of in the lead up to the release, that a PS4 version of this game was actually planned and was canceled because they didn't want to compromise to get this game running on cross-generation hardware. They quietly canceled the PS4 version and only developed the game for PS5. The release date was revealed at the Game Awards 2020, and in rare form, that release date was the release date. This game was not delayed after that date was announced. The game came out on June 22nd, 2023 for the PlayStation 5. All right, that's enough of the history lesson, though. Are we ready to start spoiling Final Fantasy 16?
Oh yeah.
This is your final warning. If you have not played Final Fantasy 16, pause the episode. Go play the game. It'll only take you like 60 hours if you do everything, no big deal. So go do that and then come back and press play and listen to us spoil the whole thing. Because I'd hate to be the thing that ruins the game for you before you even play it.
Yes.
All right. I say we just jump right into the ending, guys. I think there's a lot to unpack with the ending, and we'll kind of, unfold and talk about characters as we go, I'm sure, as is typical Reap the Spoils fashion. So I'm just gonna start by posing this question. Did Clive die? What are your guys' thoughts?
Okay, so he has the crystal curse, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Once that happens, at least, especially if you did the side quests in the games, essentially the only thing that's saving you is nothing. Hospice care at that point. So you're just like different characters in the game, like Tarja and Martha, they would create like little hospice care for people that had.
It's Scandinavian.
Wait, what did you say?
Talia. It's
sorry.
pronounced like an L. It's Scandinavian.
I think they say her name is Tarja in the game.
Gav says Talia.
Does he?
It's like a weird. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Say Tarja if it's easier.
I think that's just his very Scottish accent.
Maybe, but I just know that. Like
yeah.
It's intended to have like a Scandinavian. Yeah.
Jason, we know you're a nerd. It's okay.
Well, basically, those characters would create little like hospice cares or give them medicine that would expedite their death so that they're not suffering, so that they're comfortable. So if he has the crystal curse and there's no like magic anymore and things like that, then
we know
he's gonna die.
We know that the crystal's cursed. Like Sid was developing it too. We kind of see that earlier in the game. At one point, his sleeve is a little more rolled up. You see that his arm is starting to slowly turn to stone. So like it definitely doesn't just like come on you just like that. We see Clive's hand kind of turn to stone, but the reason I asked this question is there's the whole situation with Media, the red star next to the moon. that Jill always prays to, wishing for Clive to have a safe journey home, to come home safe. And we see in the end that Medea fades. It
Yeah.
disappears as Jill's looking at it, and she bursts out crying. And
Mm.
it's kind of been left a little vague as to, does that mean she no longer has to wish for him to come home safe because he came home safe? His battle is over, his journey is done? Or does it fade because he can no longer come home to her because he's gone? I
Well,
want to know which theory you guys subscribe to.
You want
I
to know
think
what theory I subscribe to?
yeah.
It was
Go
all
ahead.
just a story written by some guy named Joshua Redfield.
Joshua what?
Rosfeld, sorry.
Redfield, Chris Redfield's brother.
Joshua Redfield, Chris's long lost brother.
No, it was just it's just a random fairy tale written, because you literally interpret it like that. I actually love how vague the ending is. And I mean, not all, but there are Final Fantasies that have had endings where, like, you know, the general status of the world post ending, but not necessarily the party. I can't really use it as an example anymore because of the compilation, but that was kind of 7.
Yeah.
Obviously, since the original 7, you've had Advent Children, the compilation, and we won't go into what the ending was, but the ending was relatively vague. You just knew
I
the
would
status
say
of the world, and the status of the individuals wasn't necessarily the important part.
I would say a lot of Final Fantasies, besides the ones that have gotten direct sequels like 7, like 10, and so on, they are kind of left. They are kind of left in like, there's an ending that shows you like the current status of the world, but like it is kind of left up to, like, you're left to fill in the blanks of where do these characters go from here.
Because keep in mind, like, so many Final Fantasies towards the end of the climax of the game are involving, as this game so lovingly plays with the trope of we have to fight a god, and in some Final Fantasies, the world is literally semi-destroyed. So it's like what happens to the party is kind of left up to interpretation. It's more like what the status of the world is as a result of their actions in the end.
But you subscribe to the theory that it was all not.
No, I was joking.
Like
I was
okay.
I was just joking,
Well,
just to show how much width there is for the interpretation, and I love it. There
I
are so
think
many
that's
ways you can interpret it that Gav wrote the book and dedicate and use the pseudonym Joshua I keep wanting to say Redfield, Rosfeld.
It's okay. You can just say Joshua. There's only one Joshua in the game.
You could interpret it that Clive lived and dedicated it to his brother. You could interpret it that Joshua lived and wrote the book. There's so many different ways. Personally, I think they all died. And I refer to the 3 guys who went on to use a Mass Effect term, suicide mission.
Okay. So Clive, Joshua, and Dion.
Yeah, because effectively he removed and that's why Medea faded. Medea being one of, like, from the very beginning of the game, if you're paying attention to details and like Final Fantasy stuff, you're thinking like, oh, a red moon. This has got to play a huge role at some point, and it just never does, really. It's more symbolic than, like,
and that's all it
Yeah.
needed to be, right? Like,
Exactly.
we never necessarily got answers about what it was, but it was only really purely used for symbolism as a
Yeah.
minor plot device to kind of
But-
drive this conversation that we're having now.
But I do agree with you that when Medea disappears, it's just a function of all magic being removed from the world, which was Clive's, and move. But the important part is that then the sun rises, which is a callback to a conversation previously between Clive and Jill in her final side quest, which I guess we'll get into later. But
So yeah,
and it's also just a general, like, sign of hope.
Yeah,
It's a very hopeful, and that's all you really need. Like, I don't like getting into, like, who actually died, who actually lived. I don't think any of that stuff is really important to the story.
Again, I just want to know what theory you subscribe to, Jason.
It's just that they all died. I think
okay, that's fine.
I think it works better for just magic in general being erased from the world.
And so
Yeah.
so what you think that you're in your version of that, Gav wrote the book under Joshua's name?
Sure, maybe Gav, maybe
Okay.
Jill. Who knows?
Okay.
Doesn't really matter.
Go ahead. Go. I want Delilah to talk now. I feel
No,
like
I was
Delilah's been trying
just
to talk.
no, it's okay.
Sorry.
I would no,
It's
it's okay.
okay.
I was just gonna say there was just I noticed a connection between the baby, Etta's baby,
Mm-hmm.
being birthed as Clive allegedly died, right? And
To
when
like kind of
Metia,
trade one life for another.
I feel like something happened there, for
Okay.
sure. And the way like Gav said to the baby, like it's your world now, like do what you want with it. And we know that that baby was a magic user in some way, shape, or form. I have a theory that it was Leviathan. Leviathan's dominant, but because that icon has been absent from the entire story pretty much except in notes. But
And that's something I want to talk about later.
Also,
yeah,
keep in mind at the end, the final shot we get of Clive, he may not even be in that world anymore. The sky looks significantly different than it does when we see it from Jill's perspective.
yeah.
So he could like already be in like washing up on the shores of the afterlife, or how whatever they called it. And I don't know if they use Aether Sea like they do in
Well,
14. I
I
don't know.
think what was it called? Origin was like floating. It was like floating above the whatever that strait is between Storm and Ash. So
Yeah,
like
that's true. That's
he
true.
would have just crashed down into the water, I'm sure, and then washed ashore on either shore of one of those continents. I don't know. I didn't really interpret it. I mean, because after he washes ashore, like it's still nighttime for him, and then we see the whole scene with Jill, the sun rising. I don't think there's like a whole different
Yeah.
world thing going on, and the game never really establishes that as a possibility. So to me, it would feel really out of place, if they introduce like another world or an afterlife or something along those lines, right there at the end.
Again, like I like the reason I started off kind of with that jokey ending, like, oh, it was all just a story, none of it actually happened. It's just because the breadth of ways you can interpret it,
Yeah.
and the fact that it still gets across the core themes with Gav and the baby and Jill, and the dog and the sun rising, just the general theme that hope was achieved, that they achieved their goals, and there's a brighter morrow on the horizon.
Yeah. So Delilah, you think that Clive did die, and
Yeah, yes.
okay,
I think he died. Yeah.
okay, and then do you think that Joshua was resurrected?
Yeah, because Clive healed him essentially, like did the same healing spell that Joshua did for everyone almost, with the
But
Phoenix powers.
they repeatedly throughout the game, and they actually like leave little breadcrumbs if you actually think back, tying in with this ending. They repeatedly state that the Phoenix powers can't bring somebody back once they're dead. So he might have just healed him to make his body whole for posterity's sake.
I thought about that too, just so he doesn't have a gaping hole in his chest, but at the same time, I mean, a Phoenix does represent resurrection in some way,
Right.
so maybe because he was the Phoenix, those rules might not apply to him, but I think that if anyone's alive, it's Joshua, not Clive.
And another thing that they planted to support your theory is that if you talk with Harpocrates about Joshua, he says that like, oh, he has all the makings of a scholar. Once this is all over, I think he might write a book. But
Hmm.
they also say that about Clive, and he gives you the quilt. Like they give you all these little things. So I feel like
Yeah.
specifically so that when this conversation arises, you could argue so many different ways, and I love that.
Yeah.
I really love that too. I really love that too. And like to expound on a little bit about the quill and what he says about Joshua, like obviously that last post credit scene is in like a world, like a normal world, no magic. It's vibrant with life, and there's these just kids playing about these legends that they've heard about and read about in the book Final Fantasy, written by Joshua Rossfield. I kind of like the idea I think I think the what Delilah's talking about with Joshua being the Phoenix representing resurrection. I think it makes more sense that Joshua did come back and he wrote the book and followed through on what Harpocrates was saying. But I also really like the idea that he didn't come back, Clive did, and fulfilled the legacy of another name, similar to what he did with Sid. You know, it's not the first time Clive has used another person's name to fulfill their legacy. He did so for Sid, so what if Clive, having Tomes's quill, used that to write this book in Joshua's name and pen it to him? I like a mix of both of those ideas, even if they can't mesh together, right? Well, obviously, one has to be true or the other. Which again
Yeah.
is another reason why I really love how open ended this ending is because like you can think about it so many different ways and nobody's necessarily wrong.
Yeah, I like it too. And just like something else that kind of supports my theory a little bit is the Undying, right? There was a lot of side quests where Clive was kind of clashing with the Undying's purpose of protecting the rose fields, and they came to an understanding when what's his name? The guy from the Undying, not Jote, that's a girl. There was
I,
the
I'm
I
just
forgot.
I'm gonna say it right now for everyone listening and just for us. There's a lot of fucking proper nouns and names in
I
this game. I
I
don't
wrote it
expect us
down.
to remember all of them.
Yeah. He basically was explaining to Clive that they would do anything to protect the Rosefields, that they're not doing it as slaves, they're doing it as servants, it's a choice, blah, blah, blah. And he got Clive to understand that thinking because Clive was like, oh, you're letting your people die just for information about Ultima. And they were like, oh, well, wouldn't you like just protect Joshua? So it's like the same thing. And I
Yeah.
feel like that like supports like Clive's entire thing is that he couldn't protect Joshua at the event of Phoenix Gate, and then he wound up being alive, and Clive like essentially kept failing in protecting Joshua. Joshua would come in and protect him throughout the game more so if anything. And I feel like this was his final moment to finally do that.
And like basically fulfill his duty right up to the end. I
Yeah.
like that a lot. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
The guy's name is Cyril.
Cyril, yes,
Yeah.
that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I like that. I like that thought. I like that theory a lot. What about Dion? Do we all kind of
He's
feel that
dead.
Dion? Yeah. Okay.
He achieved his purpose. There's a lot like every character or the characters that actually a running theme that at least I perceived in this game is kind of accepting, or as you would say in like Jungian psychological terms, integrating with your shadow, which is one of the reasons why I think that they use that word so prevalently. We'll talk about it later. Talk about other stuff, but like before Dion, gets hit, returns to his normal body, and falls. Like he says, like I don't act. What is it? I don't ask for acceptance, only forgiveness. Kind of, I think that was his moment of embracing or integrating with the shadow. Like his arc was kind
Hmm.
of closed. His character
Yeah.
was then at peace.
I mean, I think in general, like you're right. He had fulfilled his purpose. His arc had kind of closed, um, by that point, and I see no reason to contrive him surviving.
I'm sure there are a
Um,
lot of people that would want him to survive just because he
oh, I
seems to
mean,
be like the favorite of everybody.
He's
yeah,
great. He's
and you know
excellent.
what? I mean, let's also just shout this out. I think Dion might be the first openly gay Final Fantasy character. I'm trying to remember any others. I mean, there's some that you can kind of insinuate, you can kind of infer like maybe they're gay. I think of like Vanille and Fang from 13. There's a lot of popular theories about them being in love with each other.
We're
But
just
it's
talking about
never.
main characters, right?
Yeah, just
Because
main.
obviously it's been in the series, just not like a main character, and not as
Yeah,
like
as I'm talking about
straightforward.
a
Yeah,
main
yeah.
prominent character like Dion. Um, I think this is the first time we've had that, and I think he's a super badass character. The Final Fantasy has a long history of really awesome dragoons as like really cool characters with really cool designs, and Dion definitely adds to that legacy in my opinion. I think he's a really really great character.
Yeah, absolutely. And his arc was sick. Like I loved
Yeah.
everything about his story.
Yeah, I mean
But
the whole fall of Sam Breck, and kind of, you get to the Crystalline Dominion, you know that him and Joshua, and this is like what, about midway, a little over midway through the game, him and Joshua are kind of in cahoots to overthrow his father and Annabella, who I'm sure we'll talk about. um and for you, like, the audience, the player knows that, and then you get to Twin Side, and suddenly Bahamut is raging all over the town. Like, it was definitely like a question hovering over my head, like, what the hell happened? Why is he doing this? Is this part of him and Joshua's coup? And you find out, no, it wasn't. He accidentally wound up being deceived into killing his father, the one person that he loved, or the person that he, I would argue, loved most in the world, even more than Terrence. Um, and for him, he just lost it after killing him. It was really really powerful shit. I think his character was fantastic.
yeah, there's so much more I can say about Dion, but just to get to the point of like me agreeing that he is also gone is he closed all his chapters. Like the one loop he had open, the one person he had still alive was Terrence, and he essentially ended that and had Terrence go on a different path to like protect the little girl that was hustling medicine in Dalmatia or whatever.
What a weird thread, by the way. Like, I don't know if you guys were compulsively holding down the touchpad to open active time lore every 5 seconds during every cutscene. It's part of why this game took me like 140 hours to platinum. Because I again, every 5 to 10 seconds would compulsively open active time lore just to read a new entry if it popped up. Um, and like every cutscene she's in, she just shows up as medicine girl like the whole time, and you're left to wonder, like, wow, there's an active time lore entry for her. Where is this going? And that lasts like through half the entire game until like she actually gets kind of more tied into the plot. Really, really weird and interesting thing. She even shows up when you talk to Vivian. She shows up in like the character map.
Yep.
It's just so bizarre.
I assume from the get go that there are a lot of modern fantasy novels that have like just random recurring minor characters like this that intertwine with different. Like a good example would be off the top of my head, like Hot Pie from Game of Thrones.
Mhm.
Well, A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
For people who get there, we won't go into it. Waste too much time. But you understand what I mean. Like he has no real like impact on anybody's story really in particular. He's kind of just along for the ride for a couple different characters.
I do feel like had this game had like a sequel or a DLC or whatever, I could see this little girl like working with Tarja because they're one of the few people that, has like I could see her having more of a purpose like in the world, because she is good at making medicine without magic, and that's obviously a rare thing. Like not many people were able to heal others without using magic.
I think it was just more important that um what's it? Dion specifically tells Terrence to go protect her, which is was his main character motivation. It was to protect others. It was he was the duty. It's probably why he's the most favorite, everybody's favorite character is simply because he's the one most driven by, loyalty and honor. It's
Yeah.
important that Dion sacrificed that to protect that little girl. I think that
Yeah.
was really her most important, service to the plot or character, I should say.
Yeah.
Also, her name is Kiel. I could not remember what her name is. Again, lots of names. Her name is Kiel. You don't really find that out until the very end, though. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, she's the one that's responsible for saving Dion's life, and that's kind of his excuse to close the thread with Terrence, is to send him off to help her, um and say goodbye to him. Another interesting Dion ism, I guess we can call it.
Dion.
It's something that I noticed and found really interesting, was that he's like the only person that refers to dominance by their icon name versus their actual name.
Mm.
It's
And
it's
I
a
don't.
good way of showing character through dialogue because
Yeah,
he shows that respect innately without it needing to be provoked.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like I don't know that he ever even called Clive by Clive or Joshua by Joshua. It was always the Phoenix and Ifrit.
Yeah.
So
But,
yeah, again,
but it's
another
also
an
a
interesting
cool.
Deonism.
It's a Deonism. It's also just a Dragoonism in Final Fantasy because they're typically distant characters.
Hmm.
So Dion
Yeah,
also because of that prim properness feels very distant when he talks to people,
yeah.
and you even see that when Mid hugs him, leading up to the climax,
Yeah.
and he's like, oh, what the?
Let's talk about the big bad. Let's talk about Ultima and how you guys kind of perceived him as a villain.
Wanted
And
him to shut up. He talked too much.
I do kind of want to open this by saying, and I'm not going to name names or any critics or any reviews, any publications, but I don't really understand this rhetoric, this idea that Ultima comes out of nowhere to pull the game's themes and focus away from politics into being like magic mumbo jumbo
Yeah,
stuff.
no, I agree with this because in actuality, Ultima takes the socio-political philosophical themes that are being shown through just the basic politics and interweaving of the kingdoms and just the world, and just brings it to a more existential level. It's actually pretty amazing how well how consistently they interwove the themes through every element.
Yes.
um I think the best way to think of Ultima, I immediately thought to Dune. I was about to say Dune, as in the Frank Herbert novel
Yeah,
slash
yeah.
movie. Um, and we'll get more into this, I guess, when we talk about Annabella. Annabella is the front-facing flat villain that is it's
Yes.
just evil
Yeah.
and no redeeming qualities.
No.
But the
Zero redeeming qualities.
actual villain, which in the case of Dune is the Emperor, who is not seen until the very end, who is the one actually masterminding everything that's happening, including what the front-facing villain does. Um, much more nuanced, much more complex in motives and in their actions. So that's kind of the way I took it.
Sure, and to criticize a game called Final Fantasy for having fantasy elements when this political turmoil is caused by magic, literally, like the use of magic and how it's used as a resource, and how it's used to enslave people, like who could wield it. Um, to just think that that magic comes from nowhere and not have a logical connection in the way that they did with Ultima would be ridiculous.
I think it's a problem of expectations. I was thinking this when I was playing the game. Even though it is true, I think the biggest mistake they might have made in the press tour leading up to it was repeatedly saying how influenced they were by Game of Thrones. Because I think for a lot of people, it set certain expectations.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with that. Even though like that after playing the game, that influence is extremely present and
Sure.
accounted for. It's really obvious.
And the irony, of course, is that even if you're a book reader or the books haven't been finished, but you know that like the ending of Game of Thrones it's more magical, high level, like not political, strictly speaking.
I like I mean like even if you just look at the first season, the first episode of Game of Thrones.
Right.
If I remember correctly, it opens with that first episode opens with the White Walkers showing up.
Yeah, they're called the White Walkers in the show. Yeah, but the
Yeah.
others in the books.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. More people have probably watched the show, so I'm just gonna use that name. But point being though is I agree with you. People probably got the wrong idea from the influence that they were kind of really obviously showing, and then said in interviews that the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones was an influence for this game. It's a fact, and it's very clear. But people probably took that. They probably took like all the marketing materials that were shown, which didn't have Ultima. It just had like the icons shown, and they kind of had that whole tagline, like the history of the crystals has commanded us long enough, something along those lines. um People probably got the wrong impression, went into this expecting it to be just mostly politics, and then got disappointed when the politics eventually stopped. But like, I don't know, if you pay attention, that was bound to happen. Ultima is not someone that comes in at the very end of the game or even midway through the game. Like, you
Very
meet
early.
Ultima, yeah, at the end of the first act you meet Ultima.
Right.
It's kind of built up that like something bigger is going on from the first third of this game.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand how you could see that and then become disappointed when the politics eventually take a back seat.
I think there's also an aspect of this game is very Final Fantasy in the trope structure it uses and also how it plays with them.
You mean fighting a god at the end of the game is
Exactly. I said that earlier.
Final
Like that.
Fantasy? Oh,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And that's not even just a Final Fantasy thing. That's Japanese. That's Japanese
yeah.
storytelling in general.
And also, let's not forget that God and religion are a big part of politics, so it all
Mm-hmm.
kind of is relative. Like we saw
Yeah.
that with Barnabas's character, like he was like really devout to this God
And just the philosophical aspects to Ultima, logos versus mythos. If you know Latin, you're gonna notice a lot more in-depth references in this game. Just the idea of the will versus the mind, or logos, the higher mind, reason, freedom, um versus mythos, which is like mythical, like a conception. um just a lot of, basically, Ultima takes a lot of like the themes that are explored earlier in the game of slavery, which are touched on with a lot of more nuance than so many other stories that we have nowadays. But slavery at every level, from just like what you think of when you think of slavery, somebody enslaving another person, to being a slave to a system, a political system, an economic system, being a slave to technology, in this case, magic, which could be viewed as an allegory for natural resources, being a slave to technology, computers, phones. These people can't even do basic functions of survival without magic. Like there's so many levels to the and degrees to the
And
way
I'll
this game
also
explores slavery, all the way up to the religious aspect, which is Ultima. Yeah.
and I was about to say, last but not least, like a slave to faith, a slave to your god, to your fate, so to speak. And one of the biggest themes about about this game is breaking free of those chains, breaking free of the chains that bind you. Um, so yeah, I agree with everything you said. I do think that, and maybe we'll talk more about this later. I do think that certain aspects of this world with regards to slavery kind of get a little heavy-handed and unnecessary
yes.
by the end of the game. There's only so many different ways you can take that theme and try something new with
They
it.
thought
Well,
of
well,
everything.
well, that
Yeah.
theme is also tied in with, I mentioned before, the idea of the shadow, integrating with the shadow, and
I, I'm
it's tied in being a slave to yourself, to your own, what Jung would call it the shadow, Freud would call it id, the animal brain.
for
And that
for what it's worth, Jason, I'm mostly referring to the side quests,
yeah,
really
yeah,
just
yeah.
beating that over, beating a dead horse with it.
I will
Um
agree with you that the um the themes of a lot of the side quests are meant to mirror things that are going on with the main characters, so I can
yeah.
definitely see that, getting appearing heavy-handed or repetitive to a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely want to touch on when we get to side quests. But let's keep rolling with
I
the
just want
main
to
story.
acknowledge like those complaints real quick. Like I can see the excitement of like the political turmoil kind of dimming once like the main political forces are down, dead, whatever the case. And so towards the end when you know the ultimate goal, Ultima, it's like less exciting because there's not as much confusion and mystery and questioning. So I can see it being less exciting to people, but that doesn't make it bad.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And it's not even about like it being good or bad. It's just like it's just the expectation that people had going into this game. It's like even people that have played plenty of Final Fantasy games before, like how did you not anticipate this? How did you not expect this? Like even the most political Final Fantasy games in the past, Tactics, 12, like they lean more into that stuff by the end and let go of the politics.
Yeah.
Right.
It's never we've never had a full on like and it could be interesting to see, but it's like it's never really been what Final Fantasy's been about. It's always been about it's kind of always had these themes of overcoming like impossible odds against a god that is
Well,
manipulating the world in a negative way.
yeah, there's always Final Fantasy has always drawn heavily on Star Wars. I mean, there's always a Biggs and a Wedge. Biggs and Wedge comes from Star Wars.
There isn't in this
There
game
isn't.
though, and that's really disappointing.
Yeah, well, you know which characters I thought were going to be Biggs and Wedge, and then when they
Tyler and
said
Wade, yes,
yeah,
the same people I
but
thought were gonna be.
but
There was some Star Wars
there's
love,
always
though.
a rebel group in this
Yes.
case. In this case, you know, you have the Hideaway and everybody there, but you have the Returners in 6. You have Avalanche in 7.
The Rebel Army in 2 is like the first instance where it's like it's literally a rebellion.
There's always
going
an
up against an
empire.
empire.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, Delilah, you were gonna say something.
No, I was just gonna say the Imperials, the Republic, like that was all present here. In addition to even the way Jill told like Clive like I love you, he was like, oh I love you, and she was like me too, and I was like, oh, she pulled like
Yeah,
a
it was Han Solo. Yeah.
yeah.
There's so many little things like that that are both nods to, obviously, you know, the makers of this game know that Star Wars was a big influence early on, but like even nods to other Final Fantasy, so many small things. Like Clive is repeatedly called by particularly Ultima Child of Fate early on. How do you say Child of Fate in Latin, Mark?
Oh God, I don't know.
Liberi Fatalis.
Uh
Which for Mark knows
There
what
we
I'm
go.
talking about. Delilah has no idea. For those who don't have any idea what I'm talking about,
one of the best composed pieces of music by Nobuo Uematsu.
Yeah, it's the opening track of Final Fantasy VIII. Yeah,
probably one of, if not the best Final Fantasy openings.
Yeah.
Man, yeah.
There's so
Very
many
good.
little references like that layered throughout.
And you know, like yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Like one thing that I was pointed out to me, and when I played through the game a second time for Final Fantasy mode, I listened a little more intently, and I definitely heard it. That first fight you do with Ultima when you're still in Waloed, and he kind of teleports Clive and Joshua away into into an interdimensional rift, and you fight Ultima there. Ultima's boss theme is the Final Fantasy 1 overworld theme in a minor key.
Sick.
Which I did not pick up on the first time, and when I heard it, it blew my fucking mind. Now, I don't really think there's much of a deep implication there. This is just something that Soken often does. He really likes to take leitmotifs from past Final Fantasy games and kind of incorporate them, usually in a thematic way. Like a lot of to talk a little bit about 14, a lot of Shadowbringers' music incorporates a lot of leitmotifs and themes from Final Fantasy 3, and that's because Final Fantasy 3 is the one with the Crystal Tower, which is a big plot device in Shadowbringers in that expansion and in the raid that happened in A Realm Reborn for the Crystal Tower.
I think there are just a little more 8 references here, maybe just because it's 16. It's just a numeric thing.
The battle theme,
the
opens very similarly to 8's battle theme. Hearing you sent me a video, Jason, of hearing them back to back, and I think a friend had mentioned it to me like a week prior to you sending it to me, and then listening to them back to back, I was like, oh yeah, wow, this is the same this is like the same tempo, the same chord progression, the same note progression. Definitely carried through. I just, before we move on, I kind of want to give my thoughts a little bit on Ultima. I think I view Ultima a little less positively than you guys do. Mostly just because I guess in the grand scheme of Final Fantasy villains, I don't think he's that great.
Oh yeah.
I think his motivations are well thought out. I think he's integrated really well into the story, but him just as a villain, with kind of like his very emotionless, and I don't wish it was any different. I get what they were going for, because there's lots of talk about the humans gaining will, gaining emotion, not just being drones to worship the gods, you know, they develop wills of their own. Having him be a contrast to that of being this very droning, monotonous, kind of lifeless being, like it makes sense. It's just he didn't really do a ton for me in terms of making me hate him, you know.
By the way, do you guys know who he's voiced by?
uh I'm not
The actor who
sure.
played Viserys in season 1 of Game of Thrones.
Oh, really?
Yep. But anyway,
Oh yeah,
I
interesting.
do get your point, and as a fellow Final Fantasy fan, I do agree. Like he's not the best villain in the series, but at the same time, he's more an antagonist than a villain.
Yeah,
Because if you
sure.
actually think about it, like his motivation is just survival.
Yes. Where
He's literally like just an alien that's
Yeah.
trying to survive and bring his
yeah.
species back. Yeah,
Yeah,
All that yeah.
go ahead, Delana, sorry.
I was gonna say all that hate was reserved for Annabella for me.
exactly. Well, that's why I mentioned. That's
Yeah,
why I
her being the
mentioned
surface
earlier.
villain.
Yeah, the front facing flat villain who is just irredeemable
Yeah.
and nothing to like about them versus the overarching main antagonist. Yeah,
I think
because
the one
even in Dune, the Emperor is more sympathetic than Baron Harkonnen. Yeah,
I think the one lingering question about Annabella is just what is her skincare routine? How did she go 15 years without aging a day? It's kind of impressive.
That's true.
I mean, we
Not
don't know.
15
We
years. So
don't
20
know.
over 20 years actually. My bad.
We
Right?
don't know how old she was in the beginning. It
Um
says Game of Thrones inspired,
yeah.
quote
Oh,
unquote.
yeah. Did you guys active time lore during the scene where she
Their
was trying to
cousin.
get it on
Yes,
with Elwyn?
I know they're cousins. Yeah.
Yeah, that was also like a detail that could go that could be missed if you're not compulsively holding that touchpad
Yep.
and reading shit. They're cousins.
Yeah, gross.
And I do think she's like I do like her as a villain, but you're right, she has no redeeming qualities. Like her whole purpose is that she just wants to um she just wants to preserve the bloodline.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah,
she
and tying back to the theme I keep talking about, the shadow. You guys, it's gonna almost be like Elric of Melniboné on this one,
great,
the Jungian theme of the
fantastic.
shadow. But like her ending, she refuses to confront and integrate with her shadow. Like that's like her whole ending. She's like the
Yeah.
only character who doesn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. But back to Ultima real quick is just yeah, I agree with you that he's more an antagonist than a villain and um I've seen this misconception a few times and I think I've seen like people kind of double back on it. Um I've seen people refer to the Fallen as others of his race, other gods that came with him, and no, I think it's pretty well established that the Fallen are just the first humans that kind of got too close to the sun and came crashing down. Um, and not that they were other members of the
Yeah.
deity, other members of the godhood,
Well,
or whatever you want to call it.
you do get that lore bit. I forget what the area is called with the waterfall where that
Yeah,
battle
it's
was, but it's
uh,
very Promethean, where they confront the gods because they want to be free and they
right.
lose, but that's where the icons I think came from. They were granted that power. Yeah,
Yeah. And I guess now that since you brought up icons, I do kind of wish that there was more to an extent. I kind of get why there isn't. This is a world where it's harder to get information, so I don't expect all the questions to be answered, but I do kind of wish they delved a little more into how becoming a dominant, how the icons work, like why the icons were created. Um and how becoming the dominant of one kind of just happens. Like it seems like it's something that it can just randomly happen to anyone. They tried to preserve the Phoenix line with Annabella and like trying to make sure that that family line gets continued. Only Ross Fields can be the Phoenix. Um and what obviously the big question of why is Leviathan called Leviathan the Lost? What happened to that icon?
see,
I feel like
as a
those are
Tolkien
all
fan, I love that stuff. It's just it's not the magic isn't explained. It's kind of vague. because it doesn't really need to be explained.
I mean, yeah, and like I said, like to an extent, I get it. It's just I would really the biggest lingering question is Leviathan to me. That's the one I want to know most about.
I know, and
Yeah.
everybody keeps saying, "Oh, that's what the DLC is going to be about." I'm like, no, please, just leave it. I love the vagaries, including the vagaries in even in character backgrounds. I mean, I guess we'll talk more about Dion at some point again, but there's even vagaries. I like it's left to not even interpretation, like the important where I feel they were vague here, and they were vague in a lot of areas. It didn't need to be explained for the story to work, and I like that there were those
Oh
mysteries
yeah,
there.
I definitely don't think it needs to be explained for things to work. I think it all works well enough on its own. It's just they don't really they like why is Clive of all people mythos? It's never really explored, and it's also never really explored how mythos, how Ifrit's powers work.
Right,
Like why is Ifrit the one? Why is the dominant of Ifrit the one that can absorb other icons?
because he's the child of fate.
Yeah, but like
I know. I get it. I get it.
it's strange to me that a fire respected icon is the one that can also absorb the powers of others of all different kinds of elements.
Hmm.
It's just I would like the answers to some of those questions, even if I don't feel that they're necessary.
Right.
Um, and I'm definitely a big believer that we don't need all questions answered. Uh, it's just there's some that I would like to know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah. Oh, well, how did you guys feel about that whole like just going back to Ultima and the final battle real quick? How did you guys feel about that like cheesy line? Or like Clive was like, "This is nothing more than a fantasy," and you're
We
its
were a
final
final witness.
witness.
I loved that kind of writing that you see for the dialogue that you see throughout.
Yeah,
For a oh god, what's it? Koji? What's his actual
Christopher
name?
Koji
Christopher
Fox.
Koji Fox. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also
Um,
think like in some way the developers had to know that this game was such a drastic change from many other Final Fantasy games that people were gonna like poke at it and criticize it. So maybe that was their way of being like, nah, it's a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah. I even if it's so obvious throughout the whole game that it's a Final Fantasy game,
Right.
like yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I mean when it came to that final battle, I was more like that was probably one of the more emotional parts for me is just the interludes. Um, when they're doing all the different icons and you can hear all the different voices.
Yeah.
That was and
Yeah.
the way Soken's music changes. So you have the normal version of the boss music, and then it swells
Mhm.
Yep.
to during those interludes, and the way it goes back and forth between that.
Yeah. The music
Yeah.
in this game was fantastic. Had chills almost every main boss battle and story moment.
Well, if you enjoy the work of Masayoshi Soken, you should go check out the hit video game Final Fantasy XIV Online. The free
Or
trial now includes the award-winning expansion Heavensward and Stormblood.
Wow.
Um anyway, yeah, that final boss was really cool. Like how he's like incorporating two different elements at a time and moves from two different icons at a time, and
Yeah.
you're kind of overcoming them with the same elements and stuff. It was very very neat.
Yeah. It was a spectacle. I mean, all these boss fights were a spectacle, but
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
it's like
Um,
in space with this eye, all these colors. It was gorgeous. I was like, oh my goodness.
yeah.
Even though that fight was easier than the initial Ultima fight when you fight him for the second time, because you fight him 3 times in this game, right? Once before Sid dies.
No,
you fight
that
him
was
as
Typhon.
If not, okay, right.
Yeah,
yeah,
which was a really interesting take on Typhon because Typhon
mhm.
doesn't normally look like he normally looks very different.
Mm,
I don't even know how to describe him. He's like a big like purple gross monster looking thing.
Yeah. It was originally the first appearance was 6, right?
Um, I think it might have been 5. I'll fact check. Go ahead.
No, I just meant, but I think while technically it's labeled as Typhon, like, yeah, I think it's essentially supposed to be you fighting Ultima for the first time.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it
Well,
too.
I think it's meant to be implied that because all of this is something we haven't really gotten into was that the Sid's whole goal was to destroy all the mother crystals so that he could free the land of magic so that everyone would have to fend for themselves and the world would stop decaying because that's kind of what the crystals were doing. They were seeping the life out of the world. Um you find out at the very end, Ultima, he kind of duplicated himself, or no, it's more like his kind, or like a hive mind, right? Like they're all one being, just split into multiples,
Yeah,
and
but and they can also create like kind of automaton, like what's his name, Howlbard, the Lord Commander for King of Walud, who's like
oh,
he's
Barnabas. Oh no,
no, Howlbard, his second,
Yes,
his
Sleipnir.
Sleipnir. We're talking about
Slipnir.
Sleipnir.
Sorry, yeah, Slipnir. Yeah, Odin's spear. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. I thought his name. Why did I thought
He
his name
has
was
a
like
last
Halvard.
name
Sleipnir
Yeah,
that they
Harvard or something like that.
yeah
Harvard. That's it. Yeah,
they use that to hide the fact that he's Sleipnir.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, like Ultima's like they're kind of like one being that can split, and like he took multiple of his vessels, and they're the ones that are tied to the mother crystals. So destroying the mother crystals actually freed them
Raise them.
of their slumber, and you
Yeah,
were kind of helping Ultima the whole time.
basically, yeah, they created the crystals to harvest all the aether
Yeah.
to rebuild their race, their world, whatever, what have you. And so the job was done. So he wanted you to destroy the crystals.
Right. So I think
Yeah.
tying this back, I think the implication is that Typhon is one of those copies of Ultima, one of those like one of those prisoners, so to speak, slumbering as the Mother Crystal, and you defeating it, you actually kind of free it into destroying the Mother Crystal. You
Hmm.
free another Ultima clone. Also, you are correct, Jason. Typhon's first appearance was in 6. But yeah, this is a very different Typhon. We've never seen Typhon look like this, so
Right.
it's kind of interesting that they use that name for this.
Creepy looking thing.
Yeah. So is the normal depiction of Typhon, just in a very different way. It's like
Like
a very
the
gross
way
pink
all the
monster.
attacks looked in that fight, and the way the arena looked, it felt very much like a near automata fight in many ways. The color palette and everything,
Mm.
the way
Yeah,
the
and that it was
balls, yeah,
just like a really bright room. Yeah. Also, I think that was our first. I'm not counting the fight against with Ifrit and Phoenix at the beginning. That was like our first true icon fight.
yeah,
Um,
fully functioning, yeah.
wait, no,
No, Typhon's not
you
considered
fight
icon,
Garuda,
You
is
fight
it?
Garuda
yeah, but
before that. I'm sorry.
Garuda, I wouldn't count Garuda so much either because it's you're just pressing forward and hitting the
Yeah,
attack button. You don't get,
it's a pretty rudimentary like introduction to fighting as Ifrit. It's not. I mean, still, I'd still say it counts. That's the tutorial fight if you want to call it
Cool, I
that.
thought.
It was cool.
mhm.
Every single one of these icon fights was cool.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like basically somebody was in a room was like thinking of these like kaiju s fights and was like, how about we make a Final Fantasy around this idea?
Yeah.
Like they just started with that idea and just built everything around the idea for
Yeah.
those fights. Yeah,
It
So
also
many
it is interesting that the series is kind of going in a direction where and this isn't a new thing. This has been happening since arguably 8, where the summons have kind of played a very core part of the story. I guess not 8. 8 didn't really, the GFs weren't really a part of the story so much. Maybe 9, definitely 10. The summons were like a core function of the plot and kind of driving it.
well, summoners and summons have always, like in 6 the espers were the progression system. In 9 you had the
I'm
eidolons.
purely talking
Like,
narrative though here.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
talking like a driving point for the story.
they were to a large extent in 9. Because they were trying to get the summon. Those were like the
I
nukes.
guess in
Yeah,
that the two of your and two of your primary party members had
they
were
were from
summoned.
the summoner tribe. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But it's an interesting direction for this series. It's been kind of really driving. I would say 10 was the biggest start for it, because Yuna was the whole point of that pilgrimage. The whole point of that story was to get the help of the Aeons. The summons of that game were Aeons. But like since then, I feel like 12 wasn't really so much focused on summons as part of story progression, but 13 definitely was. 14, obviously the primals, they're a huge part of that game's lore and story. 15, same thing. And so on. It's been kind of a growing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's say we talk about some more characters that'll kind of broaden things up with the story. We haven't really talked much about Clive. What do you guys think of Clive? Is he the next great Final Fantasy main protagonist? Do you guys like him? Do you guys like looking at his big burly chest all the time?
I'll
Yeah,
let Delilah go
Clive is
first.
great. I mean, he's just a good guy. He's a man of the people. He doesn't have his foot up his ass. He doesn't use his political name or his magical powers for any bad reason. He uses it for good, and he recognizes everyone needs to play a part to help this world. And he also helps. He does the side quests. He does fetch quests. He will collect sand, even though he has mother crystals to destroy.
Gotta go find that lost mail that the mailman dropped in Sandbrack.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
no one else could do that.
I'll have criticisms of this game, but one I will not was their decision to experiment with just focusing on a singular character. Because as a result, I think Clive is probably one of if not the most developed leads in Final Fantasy history. Obviously, the trade off is that you don't get as much screen time to develop others because everything's from his perspective. But you literally follow Clive from a not so confident, insecure youth, or he even has a bit of jealousy, to a rageful you, and also there are time jumps in there to help this, to a rageful young adult, and you literally watch him mature and grow into a man who is a leader. The game kind of starts. You referenced earlier, Delilah, that scene between Clive and his brother Joshua, where Clive admits he's a little jealous because Joshua is the Phoenix and everybody looks up to him, whereas um, Joshua feels like, no, Clive, you should have been the Phoenix. He's actually pretty insecure about himself. And it kind of sets up almost the arc, because by the end of the story, Clive has become the leader. He's grown into that that role that he was so jealous of. And Joshua is the protector in many ways for most of the game.
Yeah. I really I think this is probably the only Final Fantasy character, or this is the character that we've definitely seen the most of, like their life. You know, that whole focus really allowed us to see a very meaningful arc in a reasonable amount of time for him. And I really like and appreciate that. And I think it was also really smart to make the the opening chapter where you play as him as a teenager very short. Then the second part up to the end of the first act, where he's in his 20s, he's very vengeful, he's very angry, and doesn't quite know. He starts uncovering more information, doesn't quite know where to go from there as he finds out more about the truth. It was very smart to shorten that and have the longest part be him developing as a leader. He takes on Sid's name. He becomes the head of the Hideaway, and fills some very big shoes. I think it was very smart to cut those first two chapters short so that we could see, not short, but like, you know, have them fulfill their purpose with plenty of time, and not overdo it.
Yeah.
I also think I liked this a lot more than a lot of other. Not that I didn't like other Final Fantasy main characters. There's a trope in Final Fantasy character writing that this game I was very happy to see sidestepped, and it's not necessarily a bad trope. As I always say, tropes are tropes for a reason. It's mostly a function of the fact that you usually have a full party and you're trying to split up time, and that is that a lot of character arcs hinge on a twist, a reveal that tends to come later in the game. Um, I don't want to go into it more in depth. Would be to get into spoilers for other Final
Yeah, yeah.
Fantasies. Mark knows what I'm talking about, though, and that isn't really the case here. Not just for
Maybe
Clive, but a
maybe
lot of
just
the
for
characters.
maybe just for the audience, do you want just say a character's name to the people that know
The most
like
iconic one is obviously Cloud, but
okay, yeah.
Locke in 6 has this. Zidane in 9 has
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
Even Squall, like, well, all of the characters in 8 have this because there's the
Yeah,
twist. Yeah.
yeah. I definitely I mean, I think there is some of that, but I guess it's not so contingent on Clive himself. It's more contingent on the reality of who he is as Ifrit's dominant.
Hmm.
And then you kind of uncover more. But that again, that all happens like pretty much in the first act.
That's what I'm saying. Is like
Yeah, there's
that's
not a
the
ton that
setup.
happens.
It's not. Yeah.
Right. Pretty much everything that works with Clive's arc is all happening in the moment. It's the progression of the story that's informing who he is as a character.
Hmm.
And I definitely like that. Also, like shout out to Ben Starr, Clive's actor.
Oh my god.
Incredible job.
The
All
range of
the voice
emotion.
actors. I think I didn't.
Yeah, overall, all of the voice work is phenomenal. All of the acting in this game is really really stellar. And I really can't complain about it. But Ben Starr is the lead. He just did a really outstanding job. And it is I think in large part why Clive as a character will be so memorable, will stand or stay with a lot of us in the years to come. After this game is, after we've kind of left this game behind, we've all played it and moved on from it. Ben Starr did a fantastic job as Clive.
For sure, like the range from like being having like a deep, calm voice to like having this like kind of whiny like voice of despair when Clive was sad or nervous was
And
just phenomenal.
even just to progress it from again his teenage years to his 20s to his 30s, like it really shows, mostly from his teens to getting older. You can hear the difference in his voice and in his character. The range is just very very well done.
Yeah.
Right.
There
And
is
even.
one criticism I have of voice acting actually.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
It's that almost every kid is the same voice actor as Hugo in A Plague Tale.
Wait, no. Well, the one that I heard was actually Amicia.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
heard
Misty is one. Yeah.
Charlotte McBurney play so many different young girls in this
I think they
game.
both did then, because
They very well might have. I didn't hear Logan Hanan much. He's
yeah,
Hugo's voice and Joshua's voice as a child. I didn't hear him too much, but I heard
yeah.
Charlotte McBurney everywhere.
Yeah, he was everywhere too. He was the kid at the Hideaway. There was the two kids at the Hideaway. The
Wow.
boy was that voice. The kid in Dalmatia that saved Lubor, um, was
He
also
must
Hugo.
have masked it much better than Charlotte McBurney
The
did.
two kids at the end, what the blonde one had Hugo's voice too. Either that or they all sound the same. That was my only criticism. I
It,
was like,
it
everyone is Hugo or
it's
young Joshua.
possible. It's possible. Yeah. Also, I do want to really want to commend this game on. I feel like 95% of the dialogue in this game was voiced, and
Yeah.
only like 5% of it wasn't, and that's fucking amazing. That's incredible.
Hmm.
I wish they would do that for 14, but they absolutely won't because there's 5 to 10 times more dialogue in 14 than there is in this.
Yeah. Got
And
it.
that's saying something because there's a lot of dialogue in 16. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like you don't. I feel like you don't really see that in JRPGs. Definitely not most Final Fantasies. I feel it's very very cool that so much of this was voiced, and that the voice acting was so good.
Yes.
I guess we've talked about Clive inheriting Sid's name, but we haven't talked much about Sid. What a badass intro for him to just come in and like zap all those Dalmecs that were, or no, they were Iron Kingdom guys.
Yeah.
Just zap all of them and take Clive out of the desert. That
And shows up
was
with adult Torgal.
yeah. We'll get to Torgal shortly, but yes, Sid was really really cool. And do you guys feel like he was taken too soon, or
I
is that just because I wanted more time with Sid?
That's
I wanted
probably
more
it.
time with him. That was the purpose, though, right? Like the whole
Yeah.
time I missed him, and I think
Yeah.
that was effective.
Yeah, that's probably true. How did you guys feel about his dynamic with Clive? Kind of like over like at first they're both a little wary of each other, and then over time they kind of get a little closer. Was that effective to you guys? Did that endear you to his character?
For sure, because it was also part of Clive's like understanding himself and growing, becoming the
Yeah.
leader that he is. So
And Sid's the mentor, so he's got to die, or at least he has to appear to die.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really like how like you bring up how he has to appear to die, and I feel like that plays into this whole idea of taking on his name, finishing what he started, and like he dies, but he dies really early in the game at the end of the first act. But in a way, I felt like Sid was like V in V for Vendetta, where he's not a person, he's a symbol, he's an idea. His name represents more than the person himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's more so this idea of liberation, this idea of making the world your own, and again breaking free of those chains that bind you. um and I really liked that angle. I feel like this might be the most important Sid to a Final Fantasy game, arguably. I don't know that I can think of another Sid that's like as core to the story, as important to the plot,
I
to the
think I
point.
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of another example where he's this prominent.
No,
And
but
I really like that. I think that's great.
yeah, and you're definitely right about him being more of an idea. I mean,
Yeah,
he is a character, obviously, and I think they did
and a great one
char-
at that.
yeah, they did characterize him well and also use him because he's obviously very knowledgeable. Like it's implied that he spent time in Waloed, so and it's implied that he knows what Ultima is,
Oh,
or at least has
it's
an
outright
idea.
it's
He outright
outright
says,
yeah,
"Yeah,
it's outright said that he because he was the Lord Commander under Barnabas
yeah, yeah."
until he left.
Um,
Because he
but they,
realized that where this world was going, where Barnabas was going, and in his devout nature toward Ultima, it was not. He saw the writing on the walls and he did something about it.
yeah, but I guess my point is just to say they didn't just make him a symbol. He does have a character, but I do agree with what you're saying on the whole. And as for him like dying at the end of Act One, it's kind of like important that he dies there because he effectively represents, the alternative. Like either Clive can wallow in his grief, regrets, and over his I'll use the term again, his shadow, or he can seek with his will, which is, if you read into the lore, very tied into the whole Rosarian religion of the founder, being just this dude who built a cabin and slowly built a kingdom without the help of any gods or anything. It was purely by will of man.
Mm-hmm.
Another tying into the thematic elements of slavery. Um, so he Sid kind of has to die there because it ultimately just presents Clive with a choice. And at the end of Act One, that's kind of where you usually present your hero with that choice, I guess.
yeah, and this is someone that like used magic to help people and bears, so he had to probably fight a lot. And he got hit with the crystal curse, so he knew that his time was short. So he basically passed on the baton to Clive and used his last abilities like effectively.
And I also think it says a lot that I think the only dominance that we saw had the crystal's curse were Sid and Clive, which you could look at that as that they were the ones fighting the most, using their powers the most, and they were doing it for the greater good.
Technically, Joshua, because they say there's a circle of stone around his heart.
Do they say that?
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
when you
I
first bring
I
him back to Talia, yeah,
I always figured that well, that also just could have been a result of him at the end of
He's
Act
containing,
1.
yeah, he's containing
Right.
Ultima, yeah, but he's
So
using his powers, yeah.
yeah. So okay, I guess, but again, Joshua still falls under that under that umbrella with Clive and Sid using their powers for the greater good. Um, so that's fine. I'll still count that.
Joshua was also coughing and sick since he was a kid before he absorbed the
Yeah, and
ultimate power.
that's I feel like that's something that kind of doesn't go particularly explained either. Like why was Joshua so sickly? Even as a child, I'm not sure. Maybe there's something I missed that kind of goes into that. Um,
Yeah.
but one more thing we can talk. I say we talk about Joshua. One more thing I do want to bring up about Sid is Sid traditionally is an engineer, and I like the angle that this game takes where they still establish Sid as an engineer, but that kind of lives more with his daughter Mid.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool way to still incorporate those ideas, but make it work with the idea that Sid gets taken away in very early in the game, before it's established much that he's got some engineering prowess.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of hinted a little bit with the the not the hide, yeah, I guess the hideaway in the old hideaway. I forgot what it was called. Where they built the hideaway with the ancient structures.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Fallen
Um,
Ruins, yeah.
yeah, but like I guess the biggest like the biggest thing to use to hammer this point home is the building of the Enterprise, the ship.
Yeah.
Mm,
Mid is the one that takes that on, his daughter. So
Mhm.
that's normally that would be a Sid thing. Instead, it's a Mid thing here, which I think works. It's a bit of a subversion of what we come to expect with Final Fantasy when we hear a name like Sid.
right,
It's pretty cool.
right.
Also,
Um,
was he smoking blunts the whole time?
Nah, I think it was just supposed to be cigarillas.
Oh, okay.
could
Damn.
have. I mean, it could have been blunts. He could have been
Could have been,
I
yeah,
want
having
who
that
I
knows?
want to
that
believe.
sweet
How many Gishel greens?
Dalmekian
Yeah,
that
stuffing those Gishel greens inside the
that
tobacco.
sweet
Yeah.
Exactly.
sweet Dalmekian Kush. I don't know. He's got Karen on retainer to go get that stuff for him.
Yeah.
Um. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Joshua. I don't think it's much of a surprise that he didn't die at the very beginning of the game. I think we all kind of expected they would contrive a reason or a way for him to survive. Um, I do find it a little. I don't know if that's no. I will call it a little disappointing. And Jason, I think you can back me up on this with how 14 they've in the past several expansions they've kind of found ways to contrive reasons for us to play as other characters in between points within the main scenario. I do find it a little disappointing that we don't get to play as adult Joshua. We only play briefly as child Joshua.
Yeah.
And his kind of skill set is very nerfed. I feel like it
I
would have
have a
been.
theory
Oh boy.
because this is actually just a story criticism, which is that we're never really given a good reason as to why Joshua never revealed to Clive that he survived. Um, Even after certain story points happen, where like in the very beginning when he's branded and he's forced to fight, it kind of makes sense. But
Yeah.
even after that, and Joshua always seems to be looming around him. We're never really given a good reason.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there were originally intended to be more Joshua play segments, but in order to keep the release date, they cut it, or maybe it just didn't work out. Who knows what happened behind the scenes? But I do have a feeling that originally the intent was we were supposed to get more time playing with Joshua. Also, because Yote kind of gets not short, she doesn't get much time or exploration either.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there was more meant to be explored there, and for whatever reason, it either had to be cut or they didn't have time.
I could subscribe to that. That I think there were several points where they kind of set up for moments where you'd play as Joshua, and
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I felt shortchanged, but I was definitely a
yeah.
little disappointed.
I certainly am fine with the way it panned out. I mean,
Yeah.
I still would criticize that we don't
If
really get a
if
good reason for
anything,
why he doesn't reveal himself
if you
at
well,
many
yeah,
points, but
that's a good criticism. That's something I didn't really think about. Like, there aren't many reasons you can think of why he wouldn't just reveal himself. I did really like the scene in Dalmekia. I'm forgetting the name of the first town that you go to there.
oh yeah, where you go to the inn with Byron and he's in the
Yeah,
room upstairs. Yeah,
and
the
and
camera work there, how it goes
well,
back and forth. Yeah.
the biggest thing that I loved, and this is like it's a really obvious attention to detail. It's a really obvious detail because they establish it in an earlier cutscene. Joshua doesn't like carrots.
Yes.
Clive
Mhm.
runs into the room, sees a plate empty except for carrots,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that kind of puts that thought in his head. That'd have been Joshua. I really, really liked that. It's a really obvious detail, but it's one that I really, really loved.
Yeah, and there's also the feather that keeps repeating every time he's nearby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of a calling card almost.
Mhm.
Delilah, please speak.
Yeah, sorry. I feel like it's just me and Mark going back and forth. Sorry.
It's okay. Like, all right, so the only thing I think that disappointed me about Joshua's arc is that I didn't feel as emotionally connected to him as I wanted to when he died. We don't really know if he did, but I thought that that scene would be more heartfelt because we have like this really established relationship between Clive and Joshua from when they were kids. But
Yeah.
because we didn't really see them interact for most up until the end of the game, and most of that was just them doing missions together, there wasn't really. I felt like I got more heartfelt moments between Clive and Torgal and Clive and Jill, and there was not really anything like that with Clive and Joshua, except the fact that they're brothers and Clive is supposed to be his shield.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
I will state I can understand that, and I will state I might have a bias here just because I am an older brother about the same age difference, so I can connect on that experiential level, if that makes
really,
sense. So I might be biased to things like that, where like I think that's actually a legitimate criticism that you don't get enough um, moments of levity between the two brothers. Um, that aren't like necessarily directly related to the plot to like kind of flesh out their relationship, like you're saying.
I mean,
yeah.
they spend most of their lives apart from each other, right? Like
I'm just saying, like once Joshua is actually like in and kind of just part of
No,
the
yeah,
party, if you will.
I'm kind of agreeing with Delilah in that like Joshua is perceived dead at the beginning of the game. 13 years go by, and then 5 years go by. 18 total years go by before they're reunited with each other. Like they spent the majority of their lives apart from one another. I definitely do agree that maybe we should have had some more time to kind of establish that like, even if they're brothers, I understand that bond goes deep and they were close in their younger years. Like I kind of do wish there was a little more of them like having a moment to like catch up and bond a little more.
And we
um
had like side quests with Jill and Clive, even with Torgal, like where they connect Gav, like where they connected these bonds a little bit more efficiently than the main story does. I would have rather like had like a moment with Joshua before he left just to like set that emotion home.
I'll go ahead and say it. Clive and Gav have a better brotherhood than Clive and
Oh my
Joshua
god.
do.
They connected like immediately and then they had that hug at the end and
Well,
I lost it.
replaying the game, it's actually interesting how
Because they
like
introduced him. Yeah.
Gav is a little wary of Clive for like the first few missions until there's that scene where Clive rescues Gav when
Mhm.
when he's almost fallen over the cliff. And after that, they're just like total bros, and
Yeah.
it's great. It's like, I guess we're wow. I didn't mean to just like shirk Joshua so we could talk about Gav, but Gav was great. I did not expect a character that I thought would be really forgettable early on to become like such a fantastic supporting character and such a fun companion to have with Clive, you know.
Yeah.
Really really
Mhm.
enjoyed Gav, and his whole final mission where he's like, you get drunk with him and
Yeah.
he's like you find out like about his family, how they were lost to him, and why he's kind of attached himself to Edda and her unborn child and stuff. Even if it's kind of a little icky how um
He immediately wants to be daddy.
yeah, he's just like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a father." It's like, Gav.
Clive even
No.
says
Well,
it, or
to be
someone says
fair,
it.
I think that
Yeah.
more plays into like because in that dialogue and in the quest that you're talking about, where they're at the bar,
Yeah.
like he talks about, he's like, because he's basically like drunk and just pouring out all his
Yeah, yeah.
insecurities, and he's like, I've always been a shitty brother, and obviously talks about the traumatic experience of
Yeah.
he had a baby sister, I think it was, for like an hour before a bunch of people came and killed his entire family,
Yeah.
and he just hid as a child. But even though it's not really his fault, he puts that on himself and has that insecurity.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But
Um,
And
but yeah,
he's
going
really
back to
awesome. Like
Joshua. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
he's
no.
not even like. The point is, like, that relationship was more heartfelt than, in my
And it's
opinion.
I definitely agree with you.
it's
And
given a lot more time to build and
yeah,
develop and whatnot. Again, like Clive and Joshua were apart more time of their lives than they were together. And they're legitimate brothers. I get that bond runs deep. It's just I agree with Delilah that I feel like they needed more time to kind of develop together.
I,
Yeah.
I like more scenes. Like there was one very good scene between Joshua and Clive,
Is
which
it the one where he
might
punches Clive in the
yes,
face?
Oh
yes, it's
yeah.
probably my favorite Joshua scene, just because it is a very like brotherly like
It's unexpected.
family.
Yeah, you
It's
don't see it
unexpected,
coming,
and it's
but it
also
makes sense.
the writing in it is so good because all right, so and this will probably lead into us talking about Jill, but they're
Yeah.
talking about um Jill taking, or I'm sorry, Clive taking Jill's icon from her, and she volunteers to do it.
Yeah.
And then Joshua punches her. You had no right to take that power from her. It's obvious. It's obvious that like the innuendo is that it's about him having sex with her,
Well,
but
That's
they're
not
actually
only
they're actually talking about taking the icon. The way
but
they use that as like
that
a pun.
but that conversation isn't just about that, right? The
It's not.
conversation
Yes, I know.
is mostly, really mostly about how Clive feels that he has to do this, right? It has to be him that does this on his own.
Yes.
Um
There are a lot of layers to that scene, but at
and
the same time it plays out almost like a family feud, which
yeah,
is I think exactly what Delilah would have been looking for. More scenes like that where
and
it's
Yeah.
just like brothers fighting or having fun over something. Yeah.
and frankly, this game does the whole not I don't want to spoil this game, and if you have played this game, we have a spoiler cast on it. Go play it. This game does the whole lone hero. I need to be the one to do it. That whole thing better than Horizon Forbidden West did with Aloy.
Oh yeah,
Or at
for
the
sure.
very least, it's not as ham-fisted in your face. Like Clive's not saying every 5 seconds, "No, I need to do this alone." Um,
Yeah,
it's a
But
lot more subtle.
yeah.
for sure. I don't even think
Um,
Clive realizes that he's doing that actually
Well,
until
well,
Joshua brings
Probably
it to his
not.
attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a very interesting and ties back to the idea of the shadow, because on one level it is just a character thing where Clive feels like he needs to he feels like it's his responsibility to shoulder that burden. But on another level, it's also because he's Ifrit and he's literally designed by Ultima to thirst for that power
Yeah.
of the other icons. It's
Right.
the animal brain, the id, the shadow.
Yeah.
Quick side note. I love how every episode of this
There's
podcast,
a theme.
Jason finds one thing to latch on to and bring up.
Yeah, that's
Well,
you
it's
must
just
have been really good at writing
no
essays.
no because yeah, well, sorry. No, but it's
Jason,
just
it's not a bad thing. It's just a fun
No.
observation.
but like I mentioned earlier that they use the word shadow a lot and use it as a pun. So like Joshua in particular constantly talks about how Ultima's working from the shadows. Now, obviously, he means what we all think he means. He's working behind the scenes, the
Right.
common usage of it. But he's working from the shadows in that Ultima throughout the game is literally manipulating the shadow of almost every main character. He's manipulating their demons, if you will, to use a phrase more people will probably be familiar with.
Yeah.
And he does it with Dion. He does it and to essentially affect his aims. He does it with Annabella. He does it with everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all through oh god, Olivier. that is essentially
Well,
the
Olivier is
shadow that he.
interesting because was Olivier ever even a thing, or was it just
No.
No, I think he was. I think he was just like I think he was. I think he was just indoctrinated very early on to
or
be used as a
Akashic because
pawn.
he blows up like the Akashic
Yeah.
in the blue.
Yeah, and like the Akashic or becoming Akashic, like I feel like that's not another thing that's kind of not fully explored in terms of how like it's kind of implied you can be Akashic, which is to say you can be without a will of your own and not appear like a lot of the Akashic do, glowing blue with ether. Because Barnabas exists. He is a thrall to Ultima. He is completely indoctrinated under Ultima's control and has very little will of his own.
Barnabas is also weird though because it's not clear that he's entirely human like everybody else in the game.
Well, he's one of two characters that like don't really age, but
Because he's from a completely different continent originally.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's technically not from Ash. He kind of invaded and took over Ash and founded Waloed on his own. And yeah, but he doesn't age, and it's even mentioned multiple times that he doesn't age
yeah,
by
he's like
other
hundreds of
characters.
years old. Yeah,
Yeah. But I'm not, to bring up characters that don't age, like I'm not trying to parallel him with Annabella. I don't think the game intended to make her not appear to age. I think it was just like an oversight. They didn't want to create a different model or something
Mm.
for her as an adult, as an older adult woman than when she's
yeah,
younger.
and also just because we don't spend as much screen time with her,
Yeah.
and it just makes it less confusing.
The way
Right.
Olivier died made me think he was just a manifestation of Ultima because he just exploded, like you said. But at the same time, why would Annabella think she had a kid if, like, she would
Right. And
know she got pregnant, right?
like I said, I think she's just I think Olivier was just indoctrinated and turned Akashic. It's similar to how Barnabas is very early on, and it was being used as a pawn the whole time,
Mm.
kind of
Yeah,
pulling the wool over Sylvester's eyes and making it so Ultima by extension could control Sambrek. Which
Right.
Dion saw right through and tried to do something about, and we already talked about that. Um, did we have anything else to talk about with Joshua, or do
Not
we?
really, no.
no,
Okay,
yeah, Joshua. Like I said, I have a theory that we were supposed to get more,
yeah, and
and just as a result of
time.
time and
Yeah, I mean,
development. Yeah,
let's also not forget, like, this game has been in production since 2016, but a good chunk of its development happened during COVID, so
hmm.
Yeah.
it's very possible that things were cut in the interest of time. It's just the one disappointment I have again is that we didn't get the payoff of playing as Joshua as a kid, where his move set is very limited. He's very slow. To then get to play as Joshua and as an adult, and that could have been a really cool like payoff to that early moment.
Yeah,
To
Yeah.
now he's fast and has an actual move set and can be a total badass that you get to play as. And Delilah, you wouldn't know about this, but Jason is definitely aware. Like 14, there's lots of instances during the main scenario where they'll have you play as a different person. They'll give you like certain commands that you can use, and personally, I love those sections. I think they're really creative. They let you try out different jobs that are in the game under like a limited setting. And it's just those are really cool story moments, and it's kind of disappointing that that same team couldn't find ways to implement that here,
Yeah.
because I really, really was hoping for it and would have loved it.
Yeah, for sure. I do have a question about Joshua though.
What's
Who
that?
do, if you had guys had to guess who his love interest was, I know it's all very subtle. Who would you think it is? Because I have three people that I think he might have had a crush on, but
I had
Um,
assumed that there was an implied slightly more than platonic relationship with Yote. That was my perception of it.
yeah, I thought that
I,
at first too.
I think I was thinking there was something between him and Mid.
Yeah, that's who I would guess.
Yeah, If from what I remember of their interactions, it kind of seemed that they were like, two kids that had a thing for each other but didn't want to admit it and didn't really know how to act around each other in front of other people, like that kind of thing,
He
Which
made her
also
smile
then,
more than anyone in the game,
yeah, which also
Yeah,
makes
or
sense
vice
because they're
versa.
polar
Sorry,
opposite personalities.
right?
yeah.
But like, no one made Joshua smile like Min made him smile. She is the most silly though, in his defense, but
Yeah, she's a total goofball.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah, I think Joshua as a character, I think Delilah hits it kind of right on the head where he just suffers as a result of he's out of the game for so long.
yeah,
He's out of the
yeah.
story for so long. Um, and
Which
again,
again, all the
I
more
have my
reason why we
theory, but
yeah, all the more reason why we should have had a few sections where we play as him. Like
mhm.
I think that would have been so good. Uh, Gameplay payoff and narrative payoff. I think it would have been great. Okay, we need to talk about Jill. I feel like her arc closes a little too early in the game. And I feel like the game then doesn't really know what to do with her other than make her a yes man for Clive. What are your
interesting.
guys' thoughts on Jill?
Do you
Um,
want to go first, Delilah?
I I didn't mind her being a yes man for Clive just because there was so much build up to that from when they were kids, and it just felt very authentic and beautiful and
Yeah.
classy.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, I liked their romance. I think the scene where they're naked on the beach of Ash is nothing short of beautiful. I think
Yeah.
it was a very good scene. Dialogue was great. The whole purpose of that scene was fantastic, and I feel like that was something I don't know if you guys, but I feel like a lot of me and a lot of people, especially a friend of mine that was playing the game, like we were waiting, like when are they gonna do
So
it?
much build
When are
up,
they
dude.
gonna
Yeah,
do it?
you
When are
can
they
watch.
gonna acknowledge that they
You
have
can watch
these
any
feelings for
big
each other?
streamer playing this game, and yeah, that's like
Yeah.
throughout the game, they did a really good job of that, of like putting moments throughout the game. Oh, are they gonna kiss? Are they gonna say anything on it? And then building
Yeah.
up to that. Yeah, they did
And
a very good
also,
job with the
and
romance.
that happened from when they were kids too, where like he
Hmm.
hesitated to put his arm on her.
Hmm.
And usually when they finally do the like kiss reveal, like, oh yes, they're a thing finally, it's either cheesy or dirty. And I felt like that scene was just gorgeous and beautiful and very classy. And I rarely like romance in a game, and I really connected with this romance. So it's hard for me um to like criticize her becoming like a yes person to Clive because of that, but also like who wouldn't be a yes person to Clive? Like not just because of like his
Well,
appearance or whatever, but like just like his purpose. Like it's hard to not like want to do anything you can to like follow this person because he's doing something grand.
I guess what I mean is like when I say her arc got closed too early, it was when her and Clive go to the Iron Kingdom to destroy that Mother Crystal, and she kills her
Kills the
her
patriarch.
abuser.
Yeah,
Yeah, she kills her patriarch. She kills her oppressor. I don't remember his name. Um, and by the way, the dialogue in the Japanese dialogue and thus the translated subtitles for that Japanese dialogue much more graphic than what we got in English. Implies like a lot of like sexual abuse on top of a lot of the other like on top of the slave aspect where Jill was kind of forced to fight for that kingdom. There's a lot more layers to it in the Japanese text, which I thought was interesting to find out.
Yeah.
But I feel like that all just happens really early, and after that, her arc is pretty much closed. Then there's not really much for them to do with Jill from that point out. She's just going along with Clive. Obviously, alongside him. She's ride or die with him. To the point where obviously for most of the game they put duty before booty. Um, and
I love
I
that.
just feel like they're like really early on for that to happen. There just wasn't really much for them to do with her, and I think at that point we still don't get Joshua as an additional character for Clive to bounce off of for a while. So it's pretty much just Clive and her going with the motions.
Yeah, I think I would push back against that a little bit because I see a lot of people kind of misinterpreting the arc that you're talking about with the patriarch as just pure vengeance, which it isn't. It's in her
It's
eyes redemption
yeah, it's her
because she views
again breaking free of the
yeah
chains.
because she views herself in the beginning as a monster. Even if the reason that she did the things she was doing was to prevent other people from getting harmed, she still did terrible things, and the only way to stop that was to kill the person who was doing terrible things and forcing other people to do terrible things. It was more of her not being a monster than getting vengeance per se, even though obviously it's kind of like layered in there with that. Um, but I felt like for her, a lot of the game after that was actually finding a purpose. At least that's what I got from the dialogue, the extended dialogue bit with her, because that's even the last side quest you have with her, where you set up the flower field. You're talking about what are we going to do after all this?
Well,
Like,
I think that side quest like definitely gets to that point. It's just that
yeah,
happens right at the end of the
yeah,
game,
Yeah.
and the Iron Kingdom happens much earlier.
yeah. No, I do get what you're saying. I
Yeah.
think the reason they did that was because there's also they have to fully matriculate the romance
Yeah.
with that scene with the icon, which again I love. How they use the icons as an innuendo for sex. Even obviously the characters are naked, we know what's going on, but like,
Mhm.
um, but the game even ends on her seeing the rising sun, calling back to that dialogue between her and
Right.
Clive, where she's talking about that time from a time from her childhood where she was crying because and even that kind of builds on that character arc where as a child she was effectively a ward, she was effectively a prisoner, a political prisoner,
Yeah.
and she had overheard Annabella and other ladies of the court talking about who she would be married off to.
Yeah.
So like for her, for most of her life she never had a choice, and now she does, and that's what part of kind of what's represented with the Dawn, with her, with Torgal. Kind of now she has the choice to choose how she will live her life. So I do get what you're saying, and can understand it, but I also interpreted more going on there than just that one arc of her redeeming herself and all the terrible things she was forced to do and getting over that hump.
Hmm.
There was more to her. She had to, in the same way that kind of Clive found purpose, she had to find purpose and kind of had to find a way to, like you said, break the chains and kind of forge her own path.
Yeah,
Um,
and you're right. It was just one chapter, right, dedicated to like her her redemption. But I felt like a lot of her character development was in her facial expressions because she wasn't
Hmm.
really a verbal person. Like she didn't
Yes.
talk too much. She was quiet. And so in the beginning of the game, there she was very stoic. Like you couldn't really tell what she was feeling, what she was thinking. And then after she had that chapter, that redemption, she showed a lot more emotion in her face throughout the rest of the game. And for me, that was just enough for Jill. For me.
Yeah. Plus,
But
like the
sorry.
romance was. I agree with Delilah. The romance was so good. I would actually rate it potentially one of, if not the best in the series. There.
I would put it up there. I don't know if it's the best, but
Yeah. I don't know if I would go so far as to say the best. I would have to think about it for a while. Like
I think
Locke and Celeste from Six is another one that jumps to mind.
I would
Um,
also honestly argue Titus and Yuna because that whole
no,
game is a build up of their romance.
I
I'm not
I
going to
know a
debate
lot
this
of
right now.
yeah, I know a lot of people will say that one,
Let us
and
know
I
in the
just think
comments.
that's an awful.
We're not going to get into that.
Yeah, we won't get into that
Yeah,
here, but
this isn't to say that I don't like Jill. I really like her character. It's just I was kind of hoping for a little more from her after the Iron Kingdom.
Mhm.
But like it's not to say that I did not like her character or anything.
Yeah.
Torgal though, I did not expect Torgal to like go fucking become a frost wolf and go all Fenrir and shit. That
Yeah.
was definitely a surprising twist.
another
So
criticism I'll
cool.
have is that
Oh boy.
it is that plot point is very contrived, like Deus Ex Machina.
Oh, for
This
sure.
needs, yeah, it needs to happen now.
Well, I don't think it necessarily mattered. Like if they hadn't written that in, it wouldn't have affected the story much in the event that or in during the moment that it happened. I just thought I don't know. It was just like
Yeah,
kind of
it's
an
not even.
unexpected thing.
It's not even. I mean, it is a major plot point in the sense that it prevents them from dying, but like within the grand scheme of things, like it doesn't affect the bigger picture that much. You're right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to find criticism so I don't just sound like I'm gushing.
It did it it did lead to a funny line from Harpocrates mentioning that he couldn't get his face out of his nuts or something like that.
Oh my god, I love Koji's writing in the puns. The
Yeah.
side quest called Cock and Balls
Yeah.
for the tarring for the boat. Oh my god, yes.
I mean, it wouldn't be a Koji Fox Final Fantasy game if it wasn't loaded with puns. I think
Yes.
even some of the quest names had like some cheeky references here and there. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
Hmm.
But you know, in typical 14 or CBU3 fashion.
Yeah.
All right, we gotta plow through some of these other
Can I
characters.
just make one criticism with Jill and Torgal?
Oh, go
So
ahead.
they're supposed to have like this deep connection, right? Frostwolf,
Yeah, so
Shiva, blah blah
she's
blah.
like a princess from the northern kingdoms that Rosaria defeated. That's why she's a ward.
And
Yeah.
The Frost
he's
Wolf
meant
comes
to
from the north.
be,
Yeah.
yeah,
When they first reunited, there was nothing. Like
yeah,
I expected Torgal to like jump on her and her to be like, "Oh my god!" Like you're like that with a dog every day, or you get home from work, the dog's there, you're like, "Oh my god!" You know, like you saw it for the first time, and they hadn't seen each other for years, and Torgal was always in her arms, like as kids, and when they finally reunited, I expected more, and that didn't happen. So that was like, I was like, that sucks.
I do like that they kind of established that Torgal he doesn't have necessarily a connection to Shiva, but a connection to any dominant, which explains why Torgal goes through the phase of being really close with Clive and being really close with Sid. If any of the other dominants, I'm sure if Dion was around for long enough, he would have become close with Dion as well. I think that's
Mm,
really a really cool detail.
but he wasn't close to Benedicta, and I don't blame
No,
him.
yeah, not close to Benedicta. She was angry. I mean, hey, let's talk about Benedicta, or well, let's just open it up to the remaining dominants that we haven't really talked about.
Yeah.
Benedicta, Hugo, and Barnabas. We touched on a little bit, but not a lot.
So real quick
Um,
about Benedicta, just I wanted to ask you guys what you think because it's obvious. It's not even implied. It's very much explicit that there was a deep love connection there between Sid and Benedicta.
yes, yeah,
I don't know if any of the ATL or lore entries said it explicitly, but my assumption, because at one point Sid says, "My she's my biggest regret, simultaneously my biggest regret, but my
best decision.
best decision." Is Mid supposed to be her daughter?
Mid's an adoptive daughter to Sid,
Ooh.
actually.
Is she? I
Oh, is
didn't.
she?
Yeah, they don't reveal that till the end though in the lore.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
That's that
I was the whole time
man.
I was like, "Who's Sid baby mama? I gotta know. I gotta know." And then they said it was adoptive, so I was like, "Damn it." But yeah.
Okay,
But they did have a very strong love connection. And I was
yeah.
like, "Come on, Sid, you could do better."
Well, you know, I almost felt a little disappointed that she died so early because with her and Sid having this history, having this deep connection, like obviously like Hugo was like deeply in love with Benedicta, but she didn't really care about Hugo all that
No, she
much.
was
She
No.
just
was kind of
using
just
them.
using
Yeah.
him. But she did have this deep love of Sid, and I was kind of interested to see if she would come around and suddenly, you know, eventually become an ally, maybe a cautious one, not a willing partner, but like maybe an ally out of convenience or something, you know. But she obviously dies very early in the game, and we don't really get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we were at the point where she was just too far gone away
Yeah,
from whatever that was.
yeah.
And they didn't really explain too much like the relationship. Like it's implied that he like saved her and stuff, but
Yes.
Well,
that's it.
it's implied. Definitely is implied that she was kind of treated as like, you know, a prostitute. She was definitely treated as lesser. among the people of Waloed until Sid came in and kind of saved her and gave her more of a purpose. They fall in love, and then Sid says, "All right, peace, I'm out. Barnabas is fucking crazy. Good luck with that."
Yeah.
And she probably felt more betrayed by that than Barnabas ever did.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes a lot of sense given that she then uses her sexuality to manipulate and take advantage of all
Yes.
these men, because that's something you see in real life with people who have
She's
traumatic
like, I mean,
relationship issues or have feelings of dejection. They tend
Benedicta is like
to,
a real
yeah,
femme fatale. Like
yeah.
she's a huge femme fatale, and I think it was a little disappointing for her to be the first to go. But then again, we got the really great rivalry between Clive and Hugo.
Hmm.
Or more appropriately, Sid and Hugo, because Hugo is just chasing after Sid until he finds out that Sid is Clive, and mistakens him as the one that cut off Benedicta's head. Um,
And
it's
this is a very Game of Thronesy thing where initially we're just given a box with a head, and we don't know who it is, so it's kind of like left up to speculation.
I mean, we don't even know that it's a head. We just kind of fill in the
Yeah,
blanks.
that's true. Yeah,
You know, Hugo opens a box and is horrified and angry, and then goes on an all out war with Sid, who he presumes did it. And I mean, he's
yeah.
right, but
But that's a very that's not even a Game of Thrones show thing. That's a book thing. Like everybody knows, like the purple letter, all the different letters.
I mean,
But like, yeah, like
and
having
even more
such a key plot point that isn't, it's left to speculation. Obviously, later it's explained, but
an even more parallel example, and sorry to spoil a movie that came out in like 1995, but like Seven, that's the whole big reveal at the end of
hmm
that movie is I don't need to get too explicit with it, but I think
I
anyone
think
that
people who
knows
know will
knows.
know. Yes.
Yeah. um but yeah, I think the rivalry between Clive and Hugo is great. I do feel it's a little funny that like this is obviously disconnect between narrative and gameplay, where you're slashing at things with a sword and like they're taking damage, but then in cutscene mode, Clive slashes at his hands and his hands come off.
Oh yeah.
That's just a video game thing.
I
Yeah.
know it's like, again, the disconnect between or more fancily said, ludonarrative dissonance.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he just completely dehands or I guess disarms Hugo.
Yeah.
Um, which was definitely a I really enjoyed that fight.
That was probably the
Hmm.
coolest icon fight, in my
Oh,
opinion.
I'm not even talking about the icon fight. I'm talking
Oh.
about like
The
the
throne room. The
one-on-one
throne room.
fight.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
The icon fight was like, that was probably the best spectacle fight.
Yeah.
And that was also Soken at his most unhinged with the music, fucking doing
Yeah.
like this like crazy techno beat on top of some like badass boss theme.
Again, it makes sense that Platinum was one of the studios that helped out with this, because like that was another one of those moments. It felt like I was playing a near game,
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
even the gameplay, but like the music and kind of the atmosphere
I
setup.
mean,
Yeah,
even like near aside, like Platinum has a lot of chops with big spectacle action. So,
right. Bayonetta
like,
and yeah.
yeah, Bayonetta, Wonderful 101. There's they've got the chops for big spectacle action. Um, I also find it really funny that like they said that the Osaka studio, I think, for Kingdom Hearts assisted a little bit with development, and I think that probably comes through in Ramu's inherent skill with the
Hmm.
shoot what's it called, like chain lightning or something. I can't
Yeah.
actually remember, but that's like a shot lock
Bolts
for
of
Kingdom
Judgment, I
Hearts.
think, or something like that.
Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it's interesting to like hear, oh, so and so developer helped with the development, and then you play it and you're like, ah, that's what they did. That's definitely what they helped with. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Other characters, we got to power through some of these. There's a bunch of Hideaway characters we haven't said a lot about. The one that I would definitely want to bring up, because I thought her side quest was great, was Karen, finding
Mm.
Oh
out
yeah.
how she lost her eye
Hmm.
and kind of her taking that revenge. I thought that was great.
Yeah, she's a
Yeah.
badass.
Yeah, I love how they named her Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like she's the most badass Karen I've ever seen. Even
Yeah.
like it's spelled differently.
Yeah.
But it's like she's a Karen through and through, and she's the most badass one possible.
Her and
and
Goats' relationship is adorable.
yeah,
Or Goots,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I feel like Goots doesn't get a ton of background or anything. He's just kind of he's the lovable oaf, and he's still a good character. We just don't get a ton of he doesn't get a ton of like of spotlight, you know.
Yeah, just that one mission where he goes from being like a big dope who's scared of everything to like actually trying to fight to protect
Yeah.
his Nina, or what does he call Karen?
Nan.
Nan, there you go.
Mm.
And I do love we haven't talked about some of these story moments where the party, so to speak, like gets really involved, but like that last leg of the Walud invasion where the boat crashes into the wall and they all jump off to help.
Yeah.
That was like truly badass. Such a great moment for all those characters. Really loved that. I think Taria was also really good in her progression of like warming up to Clive over time. The quest where you kind of put her master to rest. I think was really good and well done. It's just I really love how much attention was given to a lot of the people in the Hideaway. Like Otto
Well,
gets some backstory.
they kind of became part of the party.
Yeah,
in
no,
a
for
way.
sure.
Yeah.
Like Otto, you get like more insight into him and Sid's relationship and how much he misses Sid. He gives up the goblet once he finds the note, or once Clive finds the note and gives it to him, and it's just really sweet. And like not even these named characters, or I shouldn't, pretty much every character in the Hideaway is named, but I'm talking about like besides the important ones. There's that one NPC in the Hideaway that slowly over the course of the game learns how to read. And like like early in the game, she starts off, she's just like reading picture books,
Oh,
and over
yes.
time she's learning to read, and by the end of the game you go by and like you hear the dialogue between her and other NPCs, and she's written a book.
Yeah.
And like just like that kind of thing is like all throughout the Hideaway. You get these like little micro stories of these NPCs that you can't directly talk to, but like if you walk up to them, they'll like automatically say something to you.
Yeah.
Or they'll be saying something to each other, and like there's just these little micro narratives that happen, and paying attention is really rewarding because there's like these little mini stories that you can piece together that are fascinating.
Yeah, like the botanist person who was originally at the old Hideaway, like the apprentice for the side quest, and then becomes the main person.
That's actually tied into side quest too, and like even the side quest, like the side quest. I think what we can say is like, yeah, maybe there's still a little too many, and they might be a little too gratuitous, kind of cookie cutter. You kind of do the same thing in every single one, but like they're not there to offer you new things to do. They're there to offer you new stories.
Yeah.
New tales. And if you're not invested in the writing, if you're not invested in the stories that are told, then you're going to hate them, which is why the side quests are super divisive in this game.
Right.
Well, I like the character and world building that the side quest did. I couldn't stand the journey to get that information.
Yeah.
It's like, go here, get this thing. Oh, but you have to get more information about this thing from this person. And then you go there and the person's like, oh, no, you actually have to talk to this person. It's kind of like it's a chase to get this information. I feel like it would have been better in like just dialogue or interactions rather than making me go around and fight a thing or collect a thing.
There are definitely some that are a bit too long, but I get what you're saying.
I'm gonna chalk this up to CBU3 having only really developed an MMORPG, and I don't know, Jason, if you felt the same way as I did, but like there's a lot of Final Fantasy.
There's a lot of 14. Yeah.
There's a lot of 14 in this game. This basically feels like Final Fantasy 14 in some very shocking ways, and
even in combat. Yeah, combat is telegraphed in the same way it is in 14. Yeah.
Which, like, there's some aspects of that that I really like, and there's some that I don't like, and we'll talk more about that when we get to combat. But in the side quest design, I feel like I was very forgiving for the side quests being that way, Delilah, where it's just like, go talk to this person, go find these things, go back, turn it in, and whatnot. Because 14 side quests are even more abundant, and they're all the same shit.
Yeah,
But like
and
the writing in a lot of those side quests is pretty much just like straight to the point and doesn't offer much. Whereas here, it's like you're getting some deep backstory about these side characters that you're really invested and interested in. And so I kind of just tuned out and didn't really care because I've done this a million times before. But
right.
I understand why why a lot of people don't like it.
And I'm gonna say something that might be come off as a hot take. I don't know.
Mm,
I
let's
felt
hear it.
like most of these side quests, given kind of they didn't have much variety to give you in terms of gameplay for the side quests. So they were most of them were relatively short and easy to complete. Most of them. Some of them did, like Delilah said, stay a little too long past their welcome. But I've seen a lot of people compare these to like side quests in say The Witcher 3 or something like that.
No.
But here's the problem. What are you actually doing in terms of gameplay for side quests for games like The Witcher or maybe the Elder Scrolls, all these open world games? Let's use The Witcher as an example. You're pushing forward on the stick, and you're holding a button to use your Witcher sense to follow the path, which is effectively masking the fact that you're just following a path to a combat engagement, which is effectively the same thing you're doing in most of these side quests.
I agree with you, and I get it, and I agree with you. I think maybe the issue is just that the a lot of the side quests in this lead to the same old enemies.
Right.
I
There's
feel like
more
the enemy
variety.
variety it doesn't it doesn't really grow much past the midpoint of the game.
Yes,
Um,
I agree. I'm not trying to say that these side quests are in terms of the actual quest design and the enemy variety and like the gameplay aspects that you're talking about. I'm not trying to defend it on that level.
oh, I know.
I'm just like a lot of people like are really being
I
hyperbolic when they say that
I
these
agree.
quests are bad
I do
when
agree with you. I completely agree
they're
with you.
generally short and to the point in terms of the story and what it's trying to convey.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think the question that anyone that's super critical of these side quests, I think the question that those people need to ask are, well, what do you expect? What would make this better? How would you change this up that you would be pleased with it? And can you find a satisfying answer to that question? And I feel like most people that complain about them probably can't. Um, the Okay, go ahead. No,
Yeah.
please, Delilah, then
No, no.
answer. I would love to hear
Yeah.
it.
Because I don't think the side quests are bad. Like I said, the information's great. It's just the
Yeah.
journey to get there
Right,
is
right.
grueling and
It's not well masked like it is in say The Witcher, where there's a bunch of stuff that in reality you're just repeating over and over, like holding the Witcher sense button to see the path that you need to follow to the combat encounter. Like
yeah.
that's just part of game design, and I do agree with you, Delilah, that it isn't well masked here.
I think the
Um,
two things like that
yeah,
stand out for me in comparison is that The Witcher is an open world game, so you stumble upon these side quests naturally, like you're just on your way to whatever,
mhm.
and then it happens. So it feels like integrative to the world. Whereas this game is very structured, like oh, you have a big story moment, and then pop, 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 all these side quests,
Yes.
Yes,
and
that's where I'll agree with you. Where like the pacing of the side quests, and in fact, some of the side quests should have just been part of the main quest. To be honest, in
And
terms of the story
some of the
content.
main quests should have just been side quests.
Yes,
like
yes,
mids.
I will
Yeah.
agree with
Yeah,
you.
you just kill Titan, then you go back to the hideaway, and Mid's like, "I need engine parts.
Yeah.
Please help me, Clive." Oh, fine, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the pacing of them, especially like you get that last dump right before the suicide mission.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
And again, I feel like a lot of these things, like they're things that are in 14, and I love 14, and an MMO design is very different from single player video game design. So it's like I feel like I'm just more forgiving of this game for doing a lot of the things that 14 does because I'm so invested in 14 and I kind of see where the studio is coming from. But I definitely feel it could have been improved. I think the biggest thing I would say that some of these side quests could have used is drop map markers entirely. Like, give me a descript, like, and this is like quest design as it exists in the 2020s, right? Um, in Final Fantasy VII, when you got a side quest, you didn't have a map or markers on a map to follow. You had to infer or figure out what to do, or buy the Brady Game strategy guide for $15 or whatever
Yeah,
to find out what you had to do.
same thing with like old school
Right,
Elder Scrolls games.
exactly.
You had to read the
And that
journal.
shit
Yeah.
and that shit is totally lost in the modern day video game, because we all have a map and we all have markers on the map. Um and you just go to where the marker tells you to go to continue the quest. And I think maybe this game should have had side quests where you had to figure it out yourself. You didn't just follow the map marker, go there, do the thing and go back.
Yeah,
But
because yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's basically it. What were you?
I was just gonna say because then it became formulaic where it
Yeah.
was like 2 hours of main quest, 4 hours of side quests, and I only know this because I did a full playthrough on YouTube. So my
Yeah.
side quest episodes would be like 3 to 4 hours. My main quest episodes would be an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yeah.
So the side quest took up the most time, and it's not that I don't mind that. It's just the formula of it made me feel like I had to do it at that moment. Whereas other
Mhm.
games like The Witcher or Zelda, it feels like I can do it whenever I want, and it just comes up naturally as I'm exploring, and so it feels less like eh. Plus,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 16 has a fantastic story. The Witcher 3, the main story sucks. What makes that game is the side
Yeah.
quest. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like I was just ready to get back to the meat and potatoes of this game, and I felt like that was kind of taking me away from it mostly. But then when I
I
was
very much agree with
rewarded,
you with the pacing of the side quests, how they're doled out, how it's
yeah,
integrated, and I think that for them that was in terms of like the scope of the focus for this game overall, they did keep it very limited and narrow, which does have um does have its deficits like this, where the side quests are just kind of plugged in there. Even though a lot of them have like very important story stuff and very interesting story stuff. I think one of the reasons I put up that I didn't mind the side quests was just because I love the micro stories within them so
Right.
much, especially the way they developed like all of the NPCs. Like I remember Quentin's name, like
yeah,
Mhm.
and I remember his entire story. Like he was like this high noble guy who gets wronged and is seeking vengeance, goes builds a town. Like I remember him by name. He's just the fucking first NPC quest giver
for sure.
you
And
meet.
another game that does that is Mass Effect. But the thing is, Mass Effect tells those stories through dialogue rather than making you do like all of these steps to get to that story
No.
moment. You know what I
You're
mean?
much more involved with the progression of that narrative
Yeah.
than you are here.
Right.
So I get that. If we want to talk real quick about those side quest stories that the game tells, I think the best one for me was the one um in Dalmatia between the brother and sister, Theo, and I forget the sister's
Oh
name.
yes.
Eloise?
Yes,
Or
yes, Eloise. Um,
Where it ends with him dying, right? Going Akashic.
he goes Akashic,
Yeah.
yeah. And like the whole story between those two was like he was born a bear and she like helped hide that, and they kind of ran away, and she's kind of been protecting him this whole time, and he wants to kind of make it up to her and kind of make it so she doesn't have to do that for him anymore. And he goes to that one town that's getting attacked, and spends the dragon wouldn't leave him alone, and he winds up going Akashic, and
That was
she's like
definitely one of the better ones, yeah.
the conclusion of that was the only one of those that like really affected me. Like I think the one in Dalmekia was really good, or not Dalmekia, the one town in Dalmekia with Lubor.
Dalamil.
Lubor, yeah.
Dalamil. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, the one with Lubor was good, and like I wouldn't say any of them were bad. Maybe the Undying one was kind of lame.
Um,
Yeah.
I think like in terms of my favorites, this one isn't like a quest giver one. But it kind of encompasses multiple characters because some of the characters die. The way they take a guy that you just think is a random tutorial character and give him a full backstory, you end up meeting. He's like your mentor when you're becoming part of the knight, the shields. and you duel him in the beginning. It's the combat
Oh,
tutorial.
Rodney
Rodney,
Murdoch.
yes, the Murdochs, yes.
Yeah.
You meet his wife later, at which point Clive doesn't even realize that he died because of him in the fire at Phoenix Gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She regales you with tales of your father, gives you his clothes. You come back, find her dead, and then later on in the game, you find, I think it's their nephew, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
Rodney's nephew, and he becomes like
Rodney's
a
nephew becomes your squire,
yeah.
which
Except
like brings full circle and is just a cool reflection on the
yeah.
growth of Clive as a character.
My one issue with that is I don't think we ever really get. I feel like we should have gotten a quest with him
With
to put Clive in that kind of tutor role. You
mhm,
know, and we never really got that. We did get that with a different NPC. There was that side quest with the one guy that was training to be a scout,
Yeah.
yeah,
and you kind of help him with that quest. You save him from being attacked by a thing, but while you're fighting the thing, he goes and gets the thing that he was supposed to get, and you have to kind of decide like should he not be a scout.
Yeah.
I feel like that needed to include the nephew, the Murdoch nephew, to really hammer that point home of him being a squire to Clive.
Hmm.
Um,
yeah. But I liked pretty much all the I liked, like I mentioned, Quentin, and Quentin actually comes to play a larger role in the bigger story,
yeah,
Huge.
a huge role, in terms of like the history of the land, the dame, and all the politics of that city, and the nuances of it. Like
yeah,
I just felt like the way it simultaneously told little micro stories, as you said before, but at the same time built the world and made it feel like a place with cultures. I really dug stuff, and I can see how people who don't necessarily like that and felt like it detracted from the main story and hurt the pacing did, like, you know, came away with a much different view of the side quests.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm definitely split, but some side quests that I really did like were the more ones in the beginning. They were super dark and
Oh, well, those were the first one. Sorry to cut you off,
yeah.
Delilah. I just want to say, like, those are the first ones that really started to make the side quests feel important
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
they were actually really effective world building, just on account of how fucked up they were.
Yeah,
well, right.
exactly.
They give
And
you insight into the cultural views,
Yeah,
and also like just it's a natural part. You look at any form of slavery throughout human history, and dehumanization on a cultural level is an important part of it, simply because you have two conflicting. You need the slaves for economic and survival purposes, but at the same time, evolutionarily, like it's another human being. There's a natural hesitancy to harm them,
yeah,
and
but
that's why,
even
a hierarchy of needs, introspection needs to be taken out. That's why so many soldiers are so fucked up when they come back, is because they've gone so long without introspection in order to be able to kill other people. It's the same thing with dehumanizing others into slavery.
yeah.
It leaves that cultural and social impact. Yeah,
yeah, that was like prevalent through a lot of side quests, maybe heavy-handedly, like Mark said before. But at this point of the game, it was kind of new, and even from a geographical and environment perspective, just the way it was introduced. Like first, you start in Northreach, where like it's a little bit cozy. There, you're at the brothel, you're learning about Isabel, and then you come out to this like land, and there's like this dark, creepy music playing in the background, and there's like a few little houses, and it's very close to the empire where all of the nobles are. So
Yeah.
it's like as you get closer to that like hierarchy of politics and class, you're facing people who are really fucked up to the bears, more so than others in other towns. Like they don't like the bears were literally like toys. Like the little girl was essentially taking bears to play with and kept killing them thinking it was a
I
toy the
mean,
whole time.
we're right. That's
Clive assumed it was a dog. He
yeah,
assumed it was a
Right.
pet,
Yeah.
and no, it was a. And you can find that girl too before you even pick up the quest.
Mm.
Like you like she'll be there. She doesn't spawn in as part of the quest pickup.
yeah. And as you
Um,
learn later, like one of the reasons why you didn't see that kind of thing in Rosaria was because Elwyn was kind of trying to slowly
Yeah.
change it, phase it out. But it even plays with the nuances. There's another side quest where you meet an old slave who's since been freed, but he still thinks of himself as a servant um to Elwyn. He worked in like the kitchen. He's the one that's hanging out on the cliff,
Yeah.
and he's like waiting for the Duke to return. And you kind of get that nuanced view of it, where like he's been how people grow to love their chains.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a few or two more characters that I really want to talk about. I think maybe we should acknowledge Blackthorn because I feel like he has one of the more prominent side quest lines.
Right, for the weapons, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that one actually plays into progression, which so it stands out a little more than the others. But did you guys enjoy like Blackthorn's kind of long-standing quest line, or?
Well, yeah, he comes across as not the quest line, it was redundant, but at least like what it did for his character. Like you have like this really brooding, like angry, grumpy guy who is actually super emotional and
Yeah.
needy. And one person recognizes those needs and tries to get Clive to help out, and then it does something cool to like, how they can spread like making weapons without using magic and fire and embers and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it, kind of the unity between him and his long lost rival or long standing rival, like the unity of that allows you to get a really powerful weapon for the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a series staple, the Ragnarok. So it's pretty cool. And then the last character, which is probably the one. This is definitely one of the instances that I teared up big time. We got to talk about the best character in the game, and that's Uncle Byron.
Yeah.
He legitimately is probably up there, like in my top 3 of favorite characters in this game.
It's one of the best lines in the game. Like all that's been said is been need to be said, but it hasn't stopped me before, so I'll say it anyway. Yeah.
He when Clive approaches him and he does the whole thing where he reenacts the play when he was a kid, and Uncle Byron just like dropping his axe and breaking down, realizing, oh, my nephew's alive. Probably the closest I came to tears. Because it was just so well done. It was so well performed, and Uncle Byron he's just such a lovable character. He's super emotional. He's got great levity, and he's got good beliefs. He's fighting for a good cause. It's like reasonable why he's kind of hiding. Yeah, he's like a rebellion benefactor, or he's he's secretly funding Wade and all of them against the Holy Empire of Sambrek because he harbors a great hatred for Annabella. I'm sure she's the reason his brother's dead.
It's also funny him, Mid, and Gav, maybe a few others. Like as opposed to the main party, who are very different from traditional Final Fantasy characters, Byron, Mid, Gav, they're probably like the most Final Fantasy, if that makes sense, characters.
I can see that they have a lot of big personalities.
Yes.
Yeah. And Byron, like, I mean, in a game that takes itself as seriously as 16 does, like Uncle Byron was just such a great source of levity. He just a lot of his lines were just very good. They made you feel good. They made you smile. There were just so many moments with him that were.
What does he say when you're fighting all the Slipneers? Like, can't you just have normal enemies or something like that?
It's only. And I love when like you go to Dalamil, you sit down at the end, and he's just like, I guess those are Hugo's men. Like out loud, come on, Uncle Byron, what are you doing? And then he like quickly drinks all the ale and eats all the food before he gets behind the counter to hide. Like,
yeah, he's funny.
Oh, he was such a good character. I really, really loved Uncle Byron.
Yes.
I just needed to talk about him. All right, we can stop talking about story and characters. Unless there's anything else you guys want to bring up, we need to move on to combat.
Yeah, there's so many more characters. Like Wade, we barely even talked about Wade, but we need to. We'll be here forever if we talk about every character.
Was awesome too.
Isabel, yes.
Yeah, the Dame.
Yeah.
There's so many characters that are worth talking about in this game.
We didn't. We only really mentioned Annabelle in passing. But I mean, we said pretty much
We
what we needed to say.
we talked
Sucks. She's a
a good
bitch.
amount about her. Yeah, there's not really a ton to say other than she's
It's like
just
I
like
said,
pure evil.
she's just the front-facing flat villain.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah,
thought that I wanted to kill her so bad from the beginning. So I was like, I'm ready to kill this bitch. And then like her committing suicide, it made so much sense rather than
Yeah.
just killing her because I felt like that would have
yeah.
been
She
like
didn't want to
a dark
confront,
moment for the characters.
like
Yeah.
going back to I keep saying the shadow. She didn't want to confront her shadow, which is just that she was a terrible mother. She
Yeah.
made all the excuses for it in the world, but she didn't want to like integrate, her failings. So
Yeah.
she refused to accept it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. If nothing else about characters, story, I say we need to talk about combat. What did you guys think of the combat system? Did you like it? Did you hate it?
I had a lot of fun. Look, it was very simple, very flashy. I love that you can respec your abilities to play with different
Yeah.
things, but essentially I was just spamming specials. I didn't really use the regular attacks that much. I didn't feel like I had to. Maybe I will on Final Fantasy difficulty. But I was just basically dodging and waiting for the cooldown and spamming my abilities.
And see, okay, and this is where I kind of gave you guys this rant a little bit in Slack, but here's my whole thing is I've kind of have an issue with cooldowns because the best abilities in this game were the ones that rewarded you with a lower cooldown if you used them at the right time. So like once I got Garuda and I unlocked Rook's Gambit, which is the one where you do a backstep and then go in for a few attacks. If you use that as a dodge to dodge an enemy attack, it actually empowers the skill, makes it more powerful, gives more hits, and it lessens the cooldown time. And I think this game, all the skills, if they were all going to have cooldowns, needed more of that, where the skills like all had a specific moment where you'd use them, and when you use them, you get rewarded for using them correctly. There were some of them, like the Titan had one where if you use it to block an enemy attack, it's more powerful. Phoenix had one where if you use it to block an enemy projectile, it's more powerful. Those are the best skills for me because they actually rewarded smart play. Cooldowns, the only factor is time. You pop a skill and then you run around with. That's why I think I was really critical for this with our discussion of God of War Ragnarok, because that game kind of gets too reliant on popping your special skills and then waiting for the cooldown to end so you can pop them again, and otherwise just running around and waiting, biding your time. And this game doesn't have a ton of that, but like I think it would have been better if there was some sort of like ability point system or something where you have 100 points and like using this skill uses 30 points, using this skill uses 40 points or whatever, and then using regular attacks would refill that so then you could use your skills, and that kind of
You're
being the
talking about
balance.
the 7 remake
Yeah,
system,
I mean,
which
yes,
I abhorred, and
I know you did, but I don't know
yeah,
why. I don't understand
a
why.
multitude of
I
reasons. We
know.
don't need to get into
If
it.
you want to listen to that, to go listen to our Final
Yeah,
Fantasy
go.
VII remake episode.
And there are even more as time goes on that I can think of. But I do agree with you that so they were kind of in a pickle because what they wanted to do was make a character action game, in the vein of like say Bayonetta, Devil May Cry,
Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry. Well, the Bayonetta team
Just,
they split off. They were from
well, no. Just to call this out, Ryota Suzuki, who was the combat a combat designer for Devil May Cry 4 and 5, specifically around Nero's character, was the combat director for this
yes,
game. Like he's a Devil May Cry staffer through and through.
yeah. No, I know, but I'm just saying they wanted to make that kind of game, but those kinds of games are have very high skill ceilings. So like the kind of attacks that we're talking about would be tied to very precise combinations. So you have they're trying to make a game, a combat system focused around this genre, but they also are trying to make this game very accessible. And the
Yeah,
easiest way to do it is cooldown. So I do agree that there should have been
I
ways
know.
to increase cooldown reduction. At the same time, they're coming off of making MMOs. And it seems clear to me that in terms of optimizing damage output, the best way was rotations with the cooldowns in the same way you do in 14, which is what I ended up doing, was fine tuning my rotations of abilities. But at the same time, I was watching Delilah play in her YouTube videos, and she played completely different, where she
Oh
was
yeah.
using abilities like, off cooldown, but spacing them out. But it wasn't like tied to stagger. Whereas with me, I would have a set of a few very specific abilities, one or two, to get to a stagger, get to
Oh no, yeah, I
halfway,
did too.
and
I
then
use
wait.
Shivas for stagger.
Yeah, and then wait until they were fully staggered to unleash all the big damage spenders. And then by the end of the game, I shifted to where I was using basically all the trap. So like Will of the Wikes or Will of the Reich, whatever it is, the one where it
Yeah,
makes all the
Will
fireballs.
of the Wikes. Yeah.
Will of the Wikes, Rhyme, the ice one, the thunder one, where I'd basically put them all out at once and just have fucking collateral
Yeah,
super
yeah.
stagger everything. And then have all my big spenders like the Bahama beam for when single target enemies. So I was almost like min maxing it like you would a rotation in an MMO.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then Delilah is able to play it very much straight up, just like an action game. Um, so it's very interesting, like how you're able to um, play in very different ways. I do agree with you that the cooldowns, they could have dealt with that in a more nuanced way.
Well,
Yeah.
but you bring up a great point, though, is that yes, they did want to make this game as accessible as possible, and if they just straight up made a Devil May Cry game, they would be doing the opposite of that because,
Those
Yeah.
games are hard.
yeah, I will
Oh,
say I do feel like I maybe spoiled myself a bit by playing through the entire Devil May Cry series before this.
oh
Mhm.
wow.
Because God, did I find this game way too easy, even on Final Fantasy mode, just way too
It
easy.
was very. Oh, well, I can't even speak for fun, but it was very easy.
Yeah.
Like I barely had to think, but I like that I was able to play with every single ability without worrying about skill points. And so
Yeah, yeah.
probably what you saw, Jason, was me just picking random abilities to
Exactly. You
try.
picked what was fun for you. Like some people
No, not
hated.
even. I just picked everything. I played with every single
Yeah, no,
ability throughout the game.
I saw your
And then the
stuff. I was
very
like,
end, I wound
why
up
are
at
you using those abilities? Why do you
yeah, a
like?
lot of them
Yes,
sucked. At the end, I was like, okay, Shiva for stagger, Bahamut for DPS, and then I use Ramu for like somewhere in between, like for like range and stuff like that. So then I was a lot more mindful of it towards the end. But during the game, I was like, as I got a new icon ability, I was like, oh, let me equip this or this, and I was like,
but you know,
So
what I guess the point I'm trying to get across is there are pros and cons, right? Like the pros are that there's a lot of variety and a lot of different play styles that people can engage in. The cons are that for, I hate to put it, more hardcore gamers, yeah, it's going to be easier. People don't like people like Mark don't like the things like the cooldowns, and the way it feels like you're just cycling out, very much in like almost a semi, if depending on how you're optimizing it, MMO type way with rotations, based on your cooldowns and
I
based
mean,
on stagger.
I will say, like, the cooldowns were never so bad that like it became an issue where I felt like I just had to wait for them to come back, because the core combat of just attacking and like all the things you're able to do, I had so much fun crafting combos.
Hmm.
Once I figured out how to effectively launch an enemy and just combo them in the air, I was fucking doing that all the time. Just jump Garuda's Deadly Embrace, do a combo, enemy step, or it's not called enemy step. It's in this. It's called I don't even remember what it's called. But you jump off the enemy and then Deadly Embrace them again, and you just keep them in the air for like 3 or 4 combos until you can just send them crashing down to the ground. Again, like I feel like playing through Devil May Cry before this spoiled me a little bit, but it also empowered me to understand how this combat system worked before I even started playing the game, because this really was Devil May Cry combat in a lot of ways. And I had a fucking blast with it, regardless of any criticisms I have with it. That's like I have criticisms of this combat. I definitely have criticisms of its progression, but it was so much fun to engage with, regardless of those issues I had.
Right, and I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to get across is that despite the fact that I didn't find it particularly difficult, I also felt like that wasn't the point, and I was having fun regardless. Yeah.
Yeah.
feel like
Definitely.
a challenging combat would have made this game less like would have been immersion breaking because like imagine like having these like cool spectacle fights which
And you
every
die
single
in the
boss
middle of
fight
it.
is, and then you die in the middle and then
Yeah.
it's like, oh okay, I guess I got to do this again.
Yeah, I guess the things that I wish were harder were just like the moment to moment combat encounters with where it's just Clive, not the icons necessarily, but I some of the hunts definitely gave me a run for my money, and
Yeah.
I enjoyed a lot of the harder hunts.
Especially because you start to it's almost, again, drawing comparisons to 14, because you start seeing more mechanics being introduced. And
Yeah.
that's an area of criticism where I feel like they could have had on higher difficulties, which I think should have been available from the start.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%.
I think on higher difficulties, like Final Fantasy difficulty, rather than just increase health pools and increase your leveling, added more mechanics, because they
Yeah.
did a good job with the mechanics that were here. And in the same way that, like, in 14, a normal raid has like the basics of what the mechanics are, and then a savage will have those mechanics extrapolated, multiplied, taken to the extreme. The same thing could have been done here.
Yeah. And I really liked and noticed obviously anytime they would do like 14 MMO mechanics, telegraphing like AoEs on the ground,
Yes.
straight
Line attacks, yeah.
straight line attacks and stuff like that. Yeah, I really liked that, and like those were some of the aspects from that carried over from 14 that I really enjoyed. One thing that I think there's a way they could have made this work, but I also understand that it would have been a very difficult thing to encompass through the whole game. I think having elements actually matter would have been really meaningful. It
Could have been
feels
cool.
weird that you can use fire attacks on a bomb and the bomb takes damage and doesn't get healed by it.
I've heard this criticism. My retort would be that what I said earlier about the variety and the amount of play styles that I've seen across not just watching Delilah, but
Well,
different people, they become invalidated and you're forced to play in certain ways, or play maybe with
see,
something you don't want to.
I don't 100% agree with that purely because equipping an icon doesn't necessarily mean you have to use that icon's skills, because when you master them, you get free reign. All equipping Garuda does is give you wind magic and deadly embrace. So if those are the only two things that you have to suffer through, and you can still just put on, Ramu's judgment bolt and Bahamut's impulse on that, then I don't think it matters as much. I think it would have been interesting to kind of have you tailor your icon equips to the situations that you were putting yourself in.
I think, yeah, and it's not that I disagree with you. I'm just putting that out there
No,
as,
you're giving a counter. You're
yeah,
playing devil's advocate, and I
yeah.
understand. I totally get it. It's just I just think it was really disappointing to find that they would always, anytime you get a new icon, they'd be like, "Oh, this icon aspects your magic to this element," and it's like, okay, that literally doesn't matter. It does not matter that I have Titan on and I'm using Earth magic
I
because it
think it would have
doesn't
been
make a difference.
I think it would have been fine had they introduced buffs and debuffs far earlier and played with that much more, because they
I mean, there
do,
really aren't there are
or
really
not
aren't
debuffs. There's
there's
just the
some
buffs.
enemy buffs, but like there's
Yeah,
not a ton of them, and like
I think they should have played with that more, especially
I agree.
earlier in the game, and then on higher difficulties, add things like debuffs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um Before we move on, because we have to start wrapping up, what were your guys' favorite icons?
Um, visually or like combat wise?
Yes, both.
Oh, Odin was the coolest looking one for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But abilities wise, I I mean I guess just the combination of like I said, Bahamut, Shiva and Ramu. I really liked all of the main specials, like the when Shiva does that ice attack, like you hit down twice and it does so much stagger damage. The Phoenix wing ability that Clive does for the Ifrit attacks. The tornado thing for Garuda, all of those were really cool, like visually. The
Yeah.
earthquake for the Titan, they were all like combat wise visually cool. I just think I liked using those three icons the most just because of damage versus stagger.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I largely agree that they all had something to add. I'll just say my favorite was Bahamut simply because the flight mechanics. Anytime you got to use the full-born flight
Like
mechanics, um, it almost felt like all range mode in Star Fox 64. Is pretty cool. Uh, but um, but it's like Bahamut, I would definitely pick as my favorite all round fight. But I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier. The final fight, the sequence where you get interludes with the music swelling and you get people cheering you on, different characters from behind. Probably one of my favorite moments in the game overall, especially at the end when Clive's father, you hear his voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Titan fight was my favorite boss fight though.
Yeah. That one was sick. Jason, what like icon like abilities? Which ones did you have equipped most of the time? What were your
Um,
mainstays? All
Definitely
reliable.
Shiva. I use the shit out of Shiva.
Okay.
Like I said, I had Rhyme. I had the only Ramu ability I used was like the lightning thing that you leave in place and shocks. So I put that.
Lightning rod.
Yeah.
Dude, that thing is so devastating if
Will of
you
Rights.
can get it right.
I switched around a lot of the abilities.
Yeah.
I noticed, Lala, you didn't even upgrade your limit break meter. It was still at 2. I was
Yeah,
at
no,
like 4 by the
Oh
end of the
man.
game. Yeah,
I maxed
because that
out
was my whole
the
thing.
special abilities.
I popped a limit break once I staggered, so now it's
Yeah.
multiplying upon multiplying damage, and you just stack. Then again, I was like trying to min max how much damage I could do once I staggered. I
Yeah,
got to
so was I.
like 80 or 90k. I think I almost hit 100. I can't remember, but
Well, I maxed out all the special abilities and especially Bahamut's like
yeah, Bahamut's
unibeam
beam. I
thing.
had the entire
Giga
game from
Flare is fucking
Giga Flare.
amazing.
Giga
Yeah,
Yeah.
Flare. Jeez.
um, but definitely the dodge you get with Shiva, the mobility aspect of that. That plus the ring that you get from the side quests that
The
bump
Berserker
up your
ring?
the berserker ring, yeah, which I
Oh
had all the time.
yeah.
Yeah. It bumps up your damage every time you dodge.
Oh yeah.
Plus you're just gliding around with the Shiva dodge. I never really got to use much of the sword. I probably would have liked it. I tried to,
What,
but I
Odin?
no. Oh yes, Odin's sword. The
Um
Genzen Seku, I forget.
Zantetsuken.
Zensek, yeah.
Yeah. Um my mainstays, I never unequipped Garuda. Garuda was on 24/7. I really and like I said, I brought up Rook's Gambit. That never came off. I always had that on.
I only use
Same.
that like the first half of the game, the Garuda ones, just to break stagger.
Rook's Gambit just always felt so rewarding when you would land it correctly. So
Hmm.
I never took it off. And then Wicked Wheel is really good for stagger and damage, so I kept that on pretty much all the time. And it's an AoE. It's really an all-in-one skill.
Hmm.
Um, I also never unequipped Titan once I got Titan because Titanic Block is really useful, and some of his skills I really liked Wind Up. He used that a lot. My
I only got
third
rid of Titan to make room for stuff, but I agree with you.
Well,
Yeah, the Titan block
my
was
third
awesome.
slot was my experimentation slot. That's the one that I would switch out when I felt the time was warranted. So like boss fights, I would use Bahamut to pop off a Mega Flare and dodge some big telegraphed attacks. If it was a big group of mobs, I'd put on Odin because landing as a level 5 Zantetsuken
Yeah.
against like 20 dudes, it insta kills everything. It's
Yeah.
fucking satisfying as hell. And like I really like how differentiated all the icons are. Like I feel like Shiva, some of her skills start to get a little like, okay, what's the point of this? I started to appreciate Shiva more on my second playthrough when I was doing a little more experimentation and I started mastering things so I could equip them anywhere. I started using Diamond Dusts a lot.
Yeah,
I
everybody
really
uses Diamond Dusts.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I didn't really care much for it in my first playthrough, and then by the time the second one came around, then I mastered it, so I
Oh
could
no,
equip it on
same.
something else.
I didn't use Diamond Dust at all.
Yeah,
Even though I had the Shiva, I had Shiva mostly for the dodge and rhyme. But like I said, my play style was different. Where always had Will o' the Rikes, whatever,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it gives you that invincibility plus you're constantly
See,
damaging whatever's next to you.
I felt like Will o' the Wisps. That's the one. I think that's the only skill that I never used because it felt like cheating.
Mm.
So I
I
never
just like
used it.
stacking it. I like stacking it with Rhyme
Yeah,
and
yeah, I
Lightning
gotcha.
just to like complete chaos, and you're just
Yeah.
racking up all these multiple hits for everything on the side. Yeah,
Right. No, I don't fault anyone for using it. Just personally, I was like, yeah, I don't want to use this because it feels like it almost feels like
I
cheating.
feel it.
So
I feel
I
like the
never
one
used
that
it.
was kind of underpowered and fell off, I think, for everybody was Phoenix.
Yeah. I really loved Heat Wave because that's the one where if you time it to block a projectile, it powers up. I used it a lot. But yeah, by the end of the game, it's kind of rendered. It's almost rendered pointless because all of its skills feel too underpowered, and there's just better versions on other icons.
Yeah.
Um, the only good thing I feel Phoenix has going for it is its inherent skill, the dash to get right up close and personal.
Yeah.
But
Which
that
Shiva replaces with their thing, yeah.
oh I wouldn't even say Shiva. I would say Deadly Embrace on Garuda is just the
That too,
inverse.
yeah.
You just and it's better. That's better to me because if you get up in the air, then you can pull enemies to you, and then you can start enemy stepping off of them. Like
Right.
if
That's
you
cool.
figure out how to midair combo, Garuda is just it's just better than Phoenix in every way.
Hmm.
And like I said, I was comboing dudes in the air like it was nobody's business. I was having so much fun with that combat system. I really, really liked this game, guys.
Also, from like a story perspective, I felt the need to use Shiva, Ramu, and
Yeah.
Bahamut because those were the homies. So I was like, oh, they gave this to me. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I gotcha. I hear you.
You had no right to take that, Clive.
I will say by the end of my second playthrough, I did start using Shiva more. I actually had her equipped and was using the I was having trouble like timing the dodge right for a while, and then eventually I kind of came to master it and get
Hmm.
it down pretty well. Um, but yeah, I Garuda and Titan, those were mainstays for me.
Hmm.
The last big thing I want to talk about is kind of the progression system because I feel like this is the thing that I'm kind of most critical on with this game. Because this game takes the approach with leveling, which is linear stat progression. That's fine. It's the gear system that I kind of have issue with because there's not much to explore in the maps. When there is something to find, it's pretty much guaranteed to outclass whatever you have, but then the next mission you'll be able to upgrade or make something that will outclass that, and if you're keeping up with the side quests and stuff, it's guaranteed you'll be able to do it. It's how did you guys feel about this progression system? Because I really found it to be really lackluster.
Yeah, I don't care. Like, just take it away completely, I feel.
Yeah, I feel
Like,
like it should have been like if they weren't going to put in the time, it should have just been like cosmetic. Like you can choose what your sword, and if they had the time, add armor options. Yeah, this is a thing where I'll agree with you. This is something the game just does poorly. It's
Yeah.
like I wouldn't even say just lackluster, poorly. And to be honest, I'm not surprised because you listen to a lot of like especially people who stream Final Fantasy 14 and do a lot of end game content. The gearing system there is a constant criticism as well.
Yeah.
Um, and most Final Fantasy games have a pretty linear gearing system, but here it wasn't even really necessary.
I mean, you can't. I wouldn't even say it has that most have a linear gearing system. It
It's the way that the
gear does
progression and stats are integrated with it. Yeah,
gear doesn't usually only have numbers attached to it, right? And like
you
the
have
again the
materia slots or skills in Final Fantasy 9 that you have to learn from them,
yeah,
right?
or like some have an element attached to them, or some
Yeah,
like do a certain status effect, and not having any of those systems in this game makes it so whichever sword has the bigger numbers is the one that you want to equip.
which is
There's
why
no
I feel
reason to
like,
not.
given the fact that they were going full character action anyway, it should have just been cosmetic choice, so you could choose whatever
Yeah.
looks the coolest to you.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree, but rather than that, I've wished there would have been more meaningful systems like an element system, or like, make some swords better at stagger but do worse damage, so you can stagger things really fast, and then it comes down to how much damage can you do with your skills.
Or
Like,
integrate it with cooldowns, like you
yeah,
were mentioning earlier.
yeah,
Build a system into the weapons where you get trade-offs
just
different. Yeah,
yeah, have certain things just do more than just like the accessory system is serviceable enough. It just needed to that some of that stuff needed to kind of move over into the armor and the weapon system, because
right.
overall that's just very linear and it's not very exciting. In terms of RPG mechanics, like, I'm always harping on about the RPGification of games. Final Fantasy is predominantly an RPG series, so it's a little disappointing to get one that's so lackluster, at least when it comes to gear. I do think people aren't looking at the abilities and the skills nearly enough when they talk about RPG mechanics, because how you spend those ability points and where you kind of equip those skills is, I think, RPG enough.
Hmm.
It's just this game as a whole is pretty light on those mechanics, and I feel like there were ways to incorporate them better.
Yeah, or just make it a not RPG Final Fantasy game for
Yeah,
once.
Well,
there's always
I would
that.
say it isn't, and I'm
Yeah,
fine with that.
I wish it
No,
would
yeah,
just leaned into that more.
yeah. This game, I would say it's an action game first, and an RPG tertiary almost.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great
Um,
action game, a bad RPG.
yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that.
which I know a lot of people have voiced that they don't like that. I
Yeah,
said in our go listen to our discussion on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Square has forever been trying to chase this fantasy, so to speak, of
and
the
will be
perfect
its
balance.
final witness.
Yeah, this perfect balance between a combo turn-based action game. And I said there in our discussion, either choose action or choose turn-based. Choose one or the other and go all in. And for the most part, they just chose action here, and I'm fine with it. And I was here for it, and I had a lot of fun with it,
Yeah.
despite the flaws, including the progression system. Which, as I'm saying, I would have just made it cosmetic or added, more, um, like cooldown buffers and such, like we were talking about, like with the Berserker ring. If you hit a dodge, you
Yeah.
get bonus power temporarily. Yeah.
I think when it comes, I to acknowledge this, but I don't want to go too deep into it because most importantly for the interest of time, but also I'm just tired of this fucking discussion. This game is a Final Fantasy game. It does not have to have, like, Final Fantasy has never been known for deep RPG mechanics. It's actually, I would say, been known for having pretty shallow ones. That because the gameplay has never really been the focus. Um, this game
Presentation
is
was always the focus. Yes.
presentation and a good story and good characters, which arguably that's like the Japanese role playing game credence, or Creed. Um, this game is still through and through a Final Fantasy game. It doesn't need to have deep RPG mechanics to be one. It is still very much a Final Fantasy. And the debate about whether or not this game is a real Final Fantasy game is pointless and stupid, and I'm tired of hearing it.
I'm kind of tired of people telling developers that their games aren't what they are. Like they do this
Yeah.
with Zelda too. It's like, series evolve, like especially series like Final Fantasy and Zelda that have been around since I was a freaking baby. Like, of course it should change. If I want
Yeah.
to play the same shit that I used to play, I'll just play that shit.
Yeah, I mean,
You know?
and that even, that discussion could expand out to like discussions of remakes, and the people complain about Resident Evil 4 remake not being enough like the original. It's like, well, just go play the original. It's still
Yeah.
around. It's like one of the most
And
accessible games out there.
also, hot
Um,
take, Pokemon would probably be a better series if it evolved itself and didn't. I'm
we
going to
definitely
ruffle
don't have
feathers.
enough time to talk about that.
Well, hey, like I said before, if they had decided to make a purely turn-based, like I've been talking to you guys, I've been playing through Octopath Traveler now, which
Yeah.
is an ode to those Super Nintendo and Super Nintendo turn-based games. I would have been fine with that too. I just want a good game,
Hey,
and
Yeah.
this was I felt flabbergasted when I finished this game because I was like, this is the first, in my opinion, good Final Fantasy game I've gotten since. Well, if we exclude 12, 14, but it's hard to exclude 14.
Yeah,
But outside of 14, like mainline since 12.
I mean, there haven't. Oh, okay. I'm a 13 appreciator. I'm not gonna go down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole though.
It's been a long time, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
I also do want to say once again, guys, reminder: if you want to play a classic turn-based RPG that directly inspired Octopath, we should do Live Alive. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Shout
Because you're
out in
trying
the
to get us to
comments
do
if you
that
want
game
us to
in a
do an
long time.
episode on Live Alive. Sorry, what's Delilah?
You've been trying to get us to do that game for a long time.
I think it would be a blast, but that's neither here nor there. Are we ready to do the final question, or is there anything else you guys want to talk about, bring up? I feel like I had to cut the gameplay section short, but I think we've covered all we need to cover with it.
yeah, all I'll say just to wrap up what you were saying about the Final Fantasy question is that yes, I agree. It changes. The focus has always been presentation, turn-based mechanics, all that stuff from the old days was all a function of presenting a good story. This was a good story. It was very
Yes.
much a Final Fantasy story.
Yes.
Um, it even played on expectations of Final Fantasy stories and subverted it. Like we talked about Biggs and Wedge earlier. There's no Biggs and Wedge, and they very much tease you with, "Oh, this is going to be Biggs and Wedge." They play with
Yep.
tropes. This is very much a Final Fantasy game through and through.
Yeah.
I think the shortcomings, it almost could serve as a model. They could do more of this, or they could do something completely different. All I know is that this was a good Final Fantasy game.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I hope more games do active time lore because, boy, I
Ugh.
have never read and understood a story this deep and many layered and complex with so many characters and words. I never absorbed it this well, and it's all thanks to the active time lore
Uh,
and good writing.
honestly, I brought up that I'm a huge defender of 13. If and when, I feel like it's an inevitable when Square Enix re-releases 13, active time lore would do wonders for making that game more digestible. Because that game throws a lot of proper nouns at you without any context, and having to navigate into the menu to go to the data bank to find the term to then read about the term it took so much time up in that playthrough. So yeah, the ability to pause at any time and just read like, oh, they mentioned Waloed. What the hell is that again? Oh, it's a kingdom in Ash that Barnabas rules. Okay, cool, thanks. Pause
Yeah.
menu. Amazing.
And I have a terrible
Amazing.
memory, so the fact that I remembered some things is just a testament to like that system
Yeah, I
being
mean
really
it
effective.
helped me to like reinforce who certain characters are, what their relationships are, and we didn't talk about Vivian much, but
Oh
like
my god.
also being able to talk to her to find out like at certain points in the story like what everyone was doing and like what the political climate was like at every point. And be able to see the character tree and find and have the reminders of like who's who and what the relationships are. And Tomes has this too, but like that's more just like an encyclopedia
Yeah.
where Vivian is like actively, here's the situation as it stands at this moment in time.
Yeah,
Um,
it was like a timeline and
yeah.
character collections, but also I forgot to mention the end of her side quest was cool too.
Yes. Yeah.
How they reveal the how the relationship between the bears and non-bears was actually equal at one point until a war happened.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
again, another
A
Final
religion
Fantasy
and war.
reference, the War
Yeah.
of the Magi.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, God, there's a lot we didn't really get to talk about with this game.
There's so much, yeah.
There's so
Like we
much.
got we get caught up in so much of the stuff.
Yeah.
We barely discussed Barnabas, but Barnabas is kind of a mystery in and of himself. So
Yeah. Hey, if there's anything that you're upset we didn't talk about, let us know in the comments and we'll probably chat with you there because, I'll be up in those comments and talking to you about certain aspects of the story that we didn't
But
get to discuss here.
for real, but was this the first game that Jason read everything?
I don't know, was
was
it?
this the first game that I what?
You
Did
read
this pass the
everything?
You know how you usually don't
Oh,
rate
you're
shit?
talking
Did this
about
pass the Jason test?
yes, because you didn't actually need those for the story to work. That's the main thing. But I did read everything, and I did like how they gamified lore with Harpocrates and like leveling up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was smart.
That was
Um,
cool.
But yeah, you didn't need any of that for the story to work. It enhanced everything. The more lore you got incorporated in, the more you read the ATL. And it wasn't a game like, say, Alien Isolation, where like the story is told through that kind of material.
Right.
Yeah.
So the way it's presented is pretty important. But yes, it passes that test.
Cool.
I also love the little 8-bit like characters on the save screen.
Oh yeah, they're always doing those. They're always doing the pixel art versions of
Pixel art.
characters.
Yeah, it's so cute.
Yeah.
And also in the last one of the episodes we did on Strangers of Paradise, where there's crystals, there's chaos. That can be relative to this game as well.
Yeah, but we didn't get any cheesy one-liners like that.
No.
And just one more. I'm sorry, we're trying to pack in so much.
Yeah.
One more thing, because we only mentioned it once or twice in passing. Soundtrack fucking killer. Soken nailed it.
Yeah, Soken always nails it.
Yeah.
He is an amazing composer. I have the 8-disc soundtrack. Don't you guys worry. I purchased the Ultimate Edition. I have yet to rip it to my laptop because it's going to take me a while. It's 8 discs.
Nice.
But at some point I'll spend an afternoon doing that.
Yes.
Okay. Final question. We got to make this a lightning round. Final question. Do you guys think we're gonna get DLC or a sequel? And if so, what do you want it to cover?
Leviathan.
Okay.
I mean, we will. I don't want to. I wish it could just stand as it is.
Yeah, I'm fine with it living.
I think if anything, I want a DLC that doesn't take place after the game. And my wish would be to give us something potentially completely unrelated to anyone we met and find out what happened to Leviathan. You know, give us something totally disconnected that gives us a little more lore, but doesn't harm our view of the characters of the story that was presented, you know?
Right.
That's what I would really like. Naoki Yoshida, Yoshi P, as we all know and love him as, he did say in an interview, his vote, if they do a DLC, his vote would be to be on something regarding Sid. So take that for what you will.
I wouldn't mind that, especially to learn the relationship between him and Benedicta. And who knows, maybe Mid was actually one of Benedicta's like bastard childs because she was like prostituted a lot, and that's why he adopted her. So maybe that could have been.
And you know, maybe that could play into why she resents and hates him so much. You know, what if that's a reason that doesn't get explored in the game, is that Mid is her daughter and he takes her and leaves.
Yeah.
You know, that could be an interesting angle, but you know, time will tell. DLC's not confirmed for this game. But it is being explored. It is being considered, likely due to the game being successful. There's a lot of talk about the sales numbers for this game, and people are questioning if it actually sold well. Square Enix themselves are questioning if it sold well. I don't want to get into that because, again, partly we don't have time, and also because I'm sick and tired of people trying to downplay this game's success. Anyway, that being said, Jason, what's the Kwasnicky rating on this bad boy?
I've struggled with this because I didn't know if I thought it would push past the 9 barrier.
Yeah.
I was sitting somewhere between 8.5 and 8.9, but I think I'm just going to give it a solid 9. The reason being is because while I do have lots of criticisms, I think because they were so focused and narrowed in and did so well what they were focused in and narrowed in on, even though the progression system, like we said, is just straight up lackluster, the writing is just so intricate, the story presentation, the icon fights, it just nails it. And as I said multiple times, some of the way they did things is the best that I believe it's ever been done in the series, or at least close to it. So I think it earns a solid 9 out of 10,
Nice.
with 5 being average.
All right, Delilah, you working on anything?
I did a full playthrough for this game on YouTube, Assassina-san.
And you cried.
I cried. I cried at the end. I cried at the beginning too, and a few points throughout the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see me be miserable doing the side quests. Because I recorded almost all of them until I was like, okay, I can't be miserable like 80% of this playthrough.
Yeah. I gotcha. If you like this episode, please, if you're listening on YouTube, thank you so much. Please give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, tell us, like, whatever thing from the game that we didn't talk about that you really wanted us to talk about, tell us and we'll talk about it in the comments. And subscribe to the channel, share the show with your family and friends and pets and kids and whoever else. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. Please rate and review the show. 5 stars preferred. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you didn't like. It really, really helps the show grow. You really, we really need your help to help the show grow. So please, please rate and review the show. Share it with friends. Share it with people that you think would like it, would enjoy it. We're just doing our best out here.
Feel free to just get in that comment section and tell me how much of an idiot or an asshole I am. You have my permission. I can take it.
Yeah. Delilah, what's our next game?
A Plague Tale Requiem.
We're finally gonna make good on that promise. We said
Yes.
we would do a Plague Tale Requiem late last year, and we wound up not being able to because Jason didn't have a PS5 yet, and we forgot that it was new gen only.
Yes.
So yeah, we're gonna do Plague Tale Requiem next.
Yes.
So catch up on that. Play that game if you haven't. If you have played it, just I guess refresh your memory on what happened, or just wait for our episode because that's coming in about a month or so.
Yeah, we did Innocence already. If you didn't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And if you played Innocence, go listen to our spoiler cast on that because we covered that. So yeah, go listen to that episode, and we'll see you next month. Thanks for listening.
Oh, I was waiting for July. Bye, everybody.
Oh, I thought I did.